The parents give the movie to Butters, who watches it and turns into Gollum.
What it is, guys? It's your boy BlastphamousHD, and today we're here to check out a video called simply ranking the best and worst South Park episodes from each season, period. Now, me personally, I've seen about 15 to 20 entire South Park episodes. I've seen a good amount of clips. So this right here is gonna really help me compartmentalize all my South Park information that I've got inside my brain. And we're about to go ahead and get this popping.
South Park. If you haven't seen it, you've at least heard of it. I mean, I'd hope so at least. It's one of the most popular shows of all time and my personal favorite. At the time of writing this, South Park has 328 episodes and a handful of Paramount exclusives, and while I could sit down and rank each individual episode against one another, that's for another video that'll get put out whenever I finally finish that. For now though, I thought it'd be fun to sit down and check out the best and worst episodes from each season, at least according to IMDb. From there, I'm going to pick out my personal favorite and least favorite episodes from each season because this is my channel and I'll do what I want. Suck it.
Best Cartman's mom is a dirty slut. That's the first episode?
Starting with Season 1, we have Episode 13 and the season finale, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, with an IMDb score of 8.6 out of 10, and for good reason. The episode centers around Eric's quest to find out who his father is. This all stems from the fact that Eric's dad isn't in the picture, so he has no one to celebrate Father-Son Day with. Oh, did I say quest? Well, it's more like a giant laundry list of names that Eric's mom has slept with. It goes something like this. Eric's mom says it's a Native American named Chief Running Water. Chief Running Water tells Eric that his mother is referred to as
Bear with Wide Canyon,
and directs him to see Chef. Chef says that Eric's mother preferred Mr. Garrison over him, but Mr. Garrison proclaims that literally everyone at the 12th annual Drunken Bar Dance has slept with her. This leads Eric to seek out Mephisto, that weird DNA dude who lives in the mountains, for DNA testing. The episode is left on a cliffhanger with all of the potential fathers, including the entire 1991 Denver Broncos roster, gathering around for the test results, before the narrator tells everyone that the answer is coming in 4 weeks. Spoiler alert, the father is actually his mom, who's a hermaphrodite. Early South Park was so chaotic, I swear.
Oh my god, the worst. Elephant makes love to a pig.
The worst episode of Season 1 is Episode 5's An Elephant Makes Love to a Pig, with an IMDb score of a 7.4, and oh boy is it something. It starts off in peak Cartman fashion with this absolute banger of a one-liner.
You get your bitch ass back in the kitchen and make me some pie.
The gang's waiting at the bus stop when the camera shifts and you see Kyle holding onto a fucking elephant. I mean, come on guys, it's in the title of the episode. But yeah, Kyle's got a pet elephant for some reason. Got it by mail order from Africa and everything. Oh, and Cartman's got a pot-bellied pig, because fuck it, why not? Matt and Trey must have been messing around with these reveal shots because there's another one right after that made me choke on my coffee. The bus pulls up, but Miss Crabtree won't let the elephant on because it's, quote, the new retarded girl. Because of this, the elephant has to ride the short bus, which is where the pan shot comes in. Listen, I get it's not a joke for everyone, and by today's standards, it's incredibly offensive, but good god did it make me laugh when I first saw it, because we've all been there. We were all in elementary school and middle school once, we all saw the short bus, we all had our little friend groups, and I guarantee you every single one of us has made a joke saying their friend belongs on the short bus. And for any of you grandstanders out there, you're the person. Anyway, after learning about crossbreeding in school, Kyle wants to breed his elephant with Cartman's pig to make pot-bellied elephants, which leads them to Dr. Mephisto's genetic engineering ranch. He's doing work that'll change the world for the better, with 4-assed monkeys, 4-assed ostriches, and a 4-assed mongoose. This guy's killing it. Unfortunately for the boys, the pig and elephant DNA won't splice, leading them to seek out Chef, who gives them an idea to help the animals make sweet, sweet love. Back at the ranch, Mephisto is able to use some of Stan's DNA from a blood sample, which he uses to make a Stan clone. There's this hilarious part where the kids try to get the animals drunk and Elton John just appears and starts singing to help set the mood. It's so over the top and stupid. Anyway, the Stan clone ends up escaping from the engineering ranch and starts terrorizing the town of South Park before Mephisto saves the day by shooting it. At the science fair, Cartman's pig gives birth to a pot-bellied pig that looks like Mr. Garrison, implying that Mr. Garrison was clapping some bacon cheeks. This is definitely one of the more unhinged episodes in the entire series, and it feels out of place with the rest of not just the season, but the show as a whole, and it looks like the audience generally agreed with that. Coincidentally, this is also my least favorite episode of the season as well. On to my personal favorite though, episode 2, Volcano. Volcano was the first episode of South Park that I ever watched as a kid. I remember flipping through channels one day, eventually ending on South Park, thinking it was another Nickelodeon show, only for my world to implode. The episode starts out with the boys going hunting with Stan's Uncle Jimbo and his friend Ned, who talks using a shitty voice box that makes him sound like an off-brand text-to-speech drone. The initial few minutes seem pretty tame, until the group finds a Rocky Mountain black bear, which leads to what I think is one of the funniest scenes in the episode.
My God, it's coming right for us!
When I say this is something that's lived with me my entire life, I'm not kidding. I still laugh every time I watch it. My friends and I still say it when we play games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. Hell, even the NYPD adopted it as their slogan. This entire moment is amplified when Jimbo sees a deer and calls for a 46 gauge, only to pull out a rocket launcher and yell, "It's coming right for us!" I can only imagine the death threats they received from PETA after this. Cartman also tells everyone he served in Vietnam, and he keeps that up the entire time. It's just peak South Park. If those shenanigans weren't enough for you, Volcano is also the episode that Randy Marsh is introduced. Believe it or not, kids, but before Tegrity Farms, Randy Marsh was just a background character, and actually one of the more logical people in South Park, working as a respected geologist. After discovering that Mount Evanson is about to erupt, we learn that the boys are camping on it. Most of the story here centers around Stan dealing with the fact that Jimbo seems to like hanging out with Kenny more than him. This all stems from the fact that Stan didn't want to shoot an animal at the beginning. Now, Randy serves as the hero of the episode, as he's the one who comes up with the idea to build a trench to save the town from lava. Well, kinda. The lava ends up taking out Denver, but who cares, the Broncos suck anyway. Kenny initially survives the eruption, but gets shot after Ned drops his gun at the end. Volcano is one of my favorite episodes of the season, and one I hold in high regard, even if it's incredibly stupid. Season 2's highest rated episode is Spooky Fish, coming in at an 8.4 out of 10. It's the Halloween special of the season, and oh my god do they come out swinging. For starters, they just keep rotating shots of Barbra Streisand on the screen at all times, for the entire episode. I wish I was joking. So what happens in it? Well, the episode opens up with an alternate reality Cartman with a goatee. This isn't the main plot though, it's just one of those things where there's a constant flip between the real Cartman and the fake Cartman throughout, and the boys can't figure it out until the end. The real story centers around Sharon getting a visit from Aunt Flo, who gives Stan a pet fish as a present. Stan thinks it's spooky, but Sharon, who's been taking ventriloquist classes, isn't buying it. Stan puts the fish in his room and everything seems fine at first, until Stan looks over and there's a whole ass body in the floor in his room. Sharon does the psychopathic thing and hides the body while telling Stan how good he is. This happens again and the entire process repeats itself. The next day, Officer Barbrady comes to take a look around the backyard, and Sharon fucking kidnaps him and locks him in the basement. Hands down, the best part of the episode for me is Chef's costume. It has nothing to do with the story, but just look at it. Okay, so the boys finally confront Aunt Flo, who tells them where she got the fish from. While the boys are trying to find out exactly where that location is, just pay attention in the background. The boys end up finding the shop where the owner tells them that it's just like all the other returns, only for the shot to pan out to reveal a bunch of demonic animals. It's here where you find out that the shop pulled a poltergeist and built the place on top of an Indian burial ground. There's even a door portal thing like the closet in the movie. Good times. It's a good episode, but to me, I was a little shocked to see it at an 8.4 considering some of the other episodes of the season. The worst episode of Season 2, and the entire series so far, is Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus, coming in at a measly 6.2 out of 10. This score is a little misleading, but also fairly accurate. See, this is the first episode of Season 2, and South Park fans were expecting the follow-up of the Season 1 finale, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, but instead, they were blessed with a full-length Terrence and Phillip episode in its place, forcing them to wait an extra week before finding out who Cartman's dad really was. It's worth noting that this was an intentional joke and the episode was released on April Fool's Day, but it was still a whole fiasco when it first released, and this is one of the lowest rated episodes in the entire series. I don't feel like I need to give a full breakdown because I don't think this is anyone's personal favorite episode, but I'll give a quick TLDR. Terrence's daughter is kidnapped in Iran, but the duo find her in Iraq. When they get home, they find out that this was all a big plan formulated by their arch nemesis, Scott. This guy. Which culminates with Saddam Hussein invading Canada. This all leads to Terrence and Phillip using chemical warfare via farts to kill Saddam Hussein. I wish I was kidding. But that's the charm of Terrence and Phillip, if you want to call it something. But yeah, understandably, the dumbest episode of the season, and not really something I would even consider to be part of Season 2. Episode 4's Chicken Lover comes in at an 8 out of 10 on IMDb, and is a big Cartman episode. I mean, most of South Park in general are Cartman episodes, but this is the big one where he drops the famous line.
Respect my authority!
Outside of that, this episode is a bit difficult to talk about without the entire video getting demonetized, which is a chore in and of itself. So I gotta kind of beat around the bush a bit here. There's a big crime scandal in South Park. Something is, choking the chickens, if you catch my drift. Someone's doing that thing where if Chris Hansen walked in, they'd be asked to take a seat. Got it? Alright, sweet. Well, whoever was doing it left a note at the scene, but there's only one problem.
All right, I can't read.
To address the Barbrady predicament, the mayor sends Barbrady back to elementary school to learn how to read, causing Barbrady to enlist Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Fat Ass to help figure out who's doing this. And as everyone was expecting, Cartman takes it a bit too far.
Sir, step out of the car, please.
With the boys' help, Barbrady learns to read, and they're able to catch the chicken choker, who's just the librarian dude at the beginning of the episode. It's all a bit strange, but a good episode nonetheless. Not counting the Terrence and Phillip episode, my least favorite of the season is episode 7, City on the Edge of Forever. While on their way to school, the psychotic bus driver detours the bus off a cliff, into a river, then off that river, past some tourists, and onto the edge of another cliff. Most of the early portion of the episode is just them teetering off the edge of this cliff, and it's all centered around Miss Crabtree yelling and threatening to kill a bunny. She ends up leaving to go find help with all the children trapped on the bus. But with nothing to do but wait, the gang starts reliving flashbacks from Season 1. Now while all that's going on, you get to follow everyone's favorite character, Miss Crabtree, as she travels around South Park just screeching at anyone she finds in an attempt to get some help. Eventually, the bus just falls directly into a giant tub of ice cream, only for it all to be some dreamception bullshit where it's like Stan's dream of Cartman's dream. It's all really strange, but yeah, that's the episode. Season 3, Episode 11, Chinpokemon, is the highest rated episode of Season 3, hitting an 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb. The entire plot is basically, what if we took Pokemon and slapped it in South Park? And holy shit, does it work. I want to set the record straight. I love everything about this episode. It's not my favorite of the season, but it's definitely number 2. There's a new Japanese game in South Park, and Cartman is exactly what every kid was like when we all heard about Game Boy Colors and the wonders of collecting Pokemon on them. Even Kyle's on board with it and buys one, though he's late to the party and doesn't really understand the hype for them. There's only one downside with the Chinpokemon. They're trying to brainwash kids into bombing Pearl Harbor. No, like, there's a moment in the video game Stan, Cartman, and Kenny are playing where they have to literally try and bomb Pearl Harbor. Good times. It's like War Thunder before the leaks. As the episode goes on, the characters slowly transition to be more anime-like with their faces and talking habits. At one point, just full-on speaking Japanese in the classroom. All of this culminates with the children being turned into Japanese pilots, tasked with, you guessed it, bombing Pearl Harbor, before their parents figure out what's going on and foil the plot by simply pretending to show an interest in Chinpokemon, immediately making it the lamest thing in the world to all the kids. Just a great episode, and one that I could watch over and over again without ever getting tired of it. Much like Season 1's worst rated episode, Jackophsaurus is my least favorite on Season 3, as well as being the lowest ranked episode. I promise this only lines up a few more times, but I don't think this one was much of a shocker. It's one of the lowest rated episodes in the entire series, coming in at a 6.4 out of 10, just barely beating out Season 2's Terrence and Phillip stinker. Okay, so the boys are camping out in the mountains. After writing America's next big hit single, Cartman wanders off to take a shit and ends up discovering a Jackophosaur. These things are so goddamn annoying. I also don't think I can show it because it's naked and has tits, so if it's blurred, that's why. Anyway, they're thought to be extinct, so now that they found one, a bunch of scientists get to work trying to breed the species so it can recover. Much like the viewers, all the townsfolk find these things incredibly annoying because, well, I mean, do I have to play anotha clip?
Lisa needs a jack-off.
To get rid of these things, the town stages a game show which is fixed to help the Jack officers win so that they can win a trip to France. And that's it. This is my least favorite episode of the season as well, since it's just annoying. The funniest moment of the episode for me is right at the beginning when Cartman is singing and playing the harmonica. Everything after that is just downhill. Outside of whatever that was, Season 3 is really solid. It was a lot tougher to pick a favorite than I was expecting it to be. There's so many good episodes in this season, and I was pretty torn between the likes of Sexual Harassment Panda, Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub, or even Jin Pokemon. But I had to go with episode 3, Succubus. For those of you who know the episode, I think you already know why, but for those of you who don't, allow me to explain. The boys show up at school one day to find out that Chef has quit after falling in love with some broad named Veronica. Mr. Garrison thinks she's a succubus, which is just a demon that sucks the life force out of you, if you know what I mean. Long story short, that's exactly what she is, and the gang figures out if they sing a song in reverse, they can kill the succubus, and Kenny in the process. But it's not the story that makes the episode my favorite. And it's not Mr. Derp, or the fact that Cartman gets bullied by the optometrist, and spends most of the episode with his pupils fully dilated. It's entirely because of Chef's family. They're easily the best characters of the episode. They refer to the boys as young crackers, and the dad just tells the story of the Loch Ness Monster the entire time, with one of the more memorable lines of the early seasons found here.
Instead, I need about 350.
It's been like 25 years since this episode originally aired, and me and my friends still, to this day, still say this shit to each other all the time. This also begs the question, is that really the main reason that this is your favorite episode of Season 3 over the other ones you listed earlier?
You're goddamn right.
Cartman joins Nambla. Oh my god, no. No!
The best episode of Season 4 is Episode 5. Cartman joins Nambla with a 9.0 rating. Cartman feels like he's simply too good for his current friend group and heads out to find a new one. Thinking he needs a more mature friend group, he decides to look for them on the internet. The second best place to look, right behind the Catholic Church Altar Boy School, I guess. Well, as you can probably figure out, he gets spammed with a ton of Jared Fogels after joining the Men Who Like Young Boys chat room. Things are looking pretty good for Cartman though. He gets to meet some new friends, they buy him a bunch of cool shit like the Kama Sutra, but the only downside is that they keep getting taken away by the FBI whenever he goes out to meet them. That's where Nambla enters the picture. Who are they? Well, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Duh. Cartman, who's loving all the attention Nambla gives him, accepts the offer to become the poster child for the organization. Oh, and while all this is going on, Kenny's parents find out they're pregnant again, and Kyle and Stan pass the time by making faces at a bunch of dialysis patients. After an FBI sting operation goes wrong, shocker, we learn that there's another Nambla in South Park, the North American Marlon Brando lookalikes. So what's going on with the Cartman Nambla? Well, there's a little Scooby-Doo style chase scene here where the FBI is running through all the doors looking for the Nambla members, only to catch the wrong Nambla group again. It's just that wacky charm, but, you know, with a group of Jared Fogels instead of someone committing tax fraud. There's a pretty good moment at the end here as well where you think they're gonna let the Nambla guys go, only for Kyle to say exactly what everyone is thinking.
Dude, you have sex with children.
Time for the worst episode on the list, and most people's least favorite episode in the entire series, mine included. Season 4's episode 14, Pip. It's got a 6.6 on IMDb, and it might as well just be a 4. The entire episode explores Pip's background, which is just Great Expectations. You know, that Charles Dickens novel? Yeah, well, it sucks. It's not really funny at all, there's no good moments in it, and none of the main characters even make an appearance. Pip is an orphan, much like in the book, who's sent to a boarding school to be raised as a gentleman. When he returns home, the lady that sent him away wants him to fall in love so the princess child chick can break his heart. I don't know, it's really dumb, no one likes this episode. Can we skip it? Awesome. Moving on to my personal favorite episode of the season, we have Probably. It's the second half of a two-part story where Chris and Saddam Hussein are fighting for Satan's love and affection. What a weird sentence. Anyway, while that's going on, Cartman has started his own church and it's beginning to grow. Just seeing Cartman as a preacher is fucking hilarious to me. And then you have Cartman's mom trying to get him to stop, and it's just the weakest attempt. The children end up building a new church while Cartman starts getting calls from Kenny, who seemingly died in the last episode, but is actually just in Mexico, which, I mean, same thing, right? Cartman ends up using that to keep scaring the kids, which is also just so damn funny. Then he starts to proclaim that he can heal people, but it's just him slapping the shit out of the kids who need help with something, and it turns into one of those Southern Baptist churches where the preacher gets the spirit of God in him and gets Parkinson's for a few minutes while everyone dances and screams amen. It's good stuff. While that's going on, Satan visits God in heaven, which is apparently just for the Mormons. Alright, back to Cartman. He's rich now. Turns out if you yell and run around in the confidence of a decorative building, people will chuck money at you, and it's all tax-free. To overthrow Cartman, they bring in Jesus, who just tells the kids to go back to school and have fun. With the kids gone, Jesus teaches Cartman a lesson by sending him someplace worse than hell. Satan ends up breaking up with both Saddam and Chris before sending Saddam to heaven to be with the Mormons. It sounds wrong, but if you flip it, it's actually Saddam's worst nightmare and more of a personal hell for him than the actual place he was living in. Season 5 is the first time where I fully agree with the top-ranked and worst-ranked episodes of the season. For the best, you have Episode 4's Scott Tenorman Must Die, with a 9.6 out of 10 on IMDb. It's one of the highest-rated episodes in the entire series, and it should come as no surprise. Matt Stone and Trey Parker even admitted in an interview that the only reason they made this episode was to show just how psychotic and truly evil Eric Cartman is as a character. Now, if you're watching this on a streaming service, or anything other than the DVD set, this is actually the third episode, as the original third episode was blocked from airing due to it showing a depiction of Muhammad. I'm pretty sure Johnny Two Cellos or Blooms has already made videos on this if you're curious about it, and I probably will at some point, but that's for another time. So why must Scott Tenorman die? Well, it all starts with Cartman bragging about his pubes to the boys. Only they're not his. They're Scott Tenorman's, who he bought them off of for $10. Now that may be gross, but don't worry, it gets so much worse. Cartman tries several ways to get his $10 back, such as showing up at Scott's house pretending to be an IRS agent with Scott's pubes just glued to his face. Anyway, Scott just kind of outplays Cartman at every angle here. Just watch this.
Just give me the $6, and then I'll give you the 20.
Okay.
Now, give me the pubes, and I'll give you back $2.
Right.
Now, give me the 12 cents, and I'll give you the rest of your change back. And then give me the 20, and I'll give you the pubes.
Sweet.
He even tricks Cartman and sends him all the way out to Fort Collins, forcing Cartman to ride 106 miles home in the back of a pickup truck. Cartman even pulls out the big guns and says they're gonna put his grandma down unless he gets his money back, and Scott makes him beg for the cash only to light the money on fire. So, to get him back, Cartman concocts a plan to train a pony to assault Scott, where you get a key piece of info about Mr. Jenkins.
Oh, well, does Mr. Jenkins know you're using his pony? He shoots trespassers on sight, you know.
Stan's Uncle Jimbo and his friend Ned help Cartman plot revenge on Scott by doing some reconnaissance with him, where you learn that Scott loves the band Radiohead. This is all actually just a ploy by Ned and Jimbo to get to see Scott's mom's tits, which coincidentally half of the town is also doing, which I thought was hilarious. But anyway, what does Cartman do with this information? Well, he voices over an interview with Radiohead to try and make Scott cry, only for Tenorman to best him yet again by showing a video of Cartman begging from earlier in the episode, which causes everyone to bust out laughing, killing Kenny in the process. He then lets it slip to Kyle that he's been training a pony at Mr. Jenkins' farm, who warns Scott about the plan, seemingly foiling it yet again. As that wraps up, Cartman invites Scott to his chili con carnival. Scott asks his parents to go get the pony to stop Eric's plan and flip it on him, before heading out to see his friends who are busy making a chili mixed with all of the pubes of every kid in town. Nice. When the two sit down for the cook-off, Scott tries to reveal it to Cartman, only for Cartman to be the one who calls it out, having switched his with Chef's right before the cook-off started. It's here that Cartman's full plan is revealed, and oh my god, is it some Silence of the Lambs level shit. He explains that he knew Stan and Kyle would betray him and warned Scott about the trap. Remember how, like, I don't know, a minute ago, we just learned that Mr. Jenkins was a psychopath who would shoot trespassers on sight? Well, it'd be a real shame if someone had sent their parents there in an attempt to steal the man's pony from his backyard, wouldn't it? Especially if someone else were to warn Mr. Jenkins of violent pony killers in the area, i.e. Scott's parents. Oh, don't worry, it gets worse. See, they're at the chili cook-off.
Do you like it? Do you like it, Scott? I call it Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman chili.
He literally fed the kid his own dead parents disguised as chili. As Scott's having a full-on breakdown, like you do, His favorite band Radiohead shows up and calls him a crybaby to his face before leaving. In one final act of true psychotic display, Cartman quite literally drinks Scott's tears. It's one of those rare episodes where every single second is perfectly used. Every word means something, there's no filler in the entire episode. Every moment where you think there's a setup, it's just a decoy for the twist at the end. Just a masterpiece of an episode.
Dang. Behind the blow.
Here's a good rule of thumb. If there's a Terrence and Phillip focused episode in a season, it's gonna be one of, if not the lowest rated episodes in that set. And season 5 is no exception. Terrence and Phillip Behind the Blow is meh. Don't get me wrong, a meh for South Park is still a 7 out of 10 on IMDb and better than most shows, but it just feels like a filler episode to me. It's a South Park episode, so there's still laughs and funny moments, but for a season with multiple episodes above a 9.0 and most above an 8.5, this one definitely stands out. The plot is focused on the boys trying to get Terrence and Phillip back together after the duo has a falling out. I don't really have much to say on it though other than that.
Prostitute?
Terrence gets fat, which is kind of funny, but it's played out right away. There's a few other funny moments, but those all come from the B plot, which has to do with South Park getting taken over by environmentalists who just use the children as free labor. They also just cut Kenny's arm off at one point to give the kids some convincing. To bring the duo back together, the boys do a Behind the Blow episode of TNP. And it's literally just 5 minutes of Terrence and Phillip history. That's right, 25% of the episode is this one mini show talking about the history of Terrence and Phillip. And it sucks. I mean, there's some references to past South Park episodes and the bigger, longer uncut movie, but that's not enough to get me to sit through 5 minutes of exposition of 2 background characters. Season 6 has some absolute bangers. You've got The Simpsons already did it, A Ladder to Heaven, Aspen, Bebe's Boobs Destroy Society, and the return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers, which, conveniently, is the highest rated episode at a 9.3. The return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers is a spoof of The Lord of the Rings, told in South Park format, which just works out so damn good. And they do a phenomenal job later on in the show with the Game of Thrones episodes, but we'll touch on that in a different part. The show kicks off with the boys playing Lord of the Rings while Stan's parents rent something for themselves. Randy sends the kids on a quest to return the Lord of the Rings movie to Butter's house, but when he puts in his and Sharon's movie, it's revealed that
That was my genuine reaction to this.
he royally fucked up and switched the movies in their cases, leaving him with a copy of Lord of the Rings while the boys are in possession of a porno. Since literally no one knows this, the parents give the movie to Butters, who watches it and turns into Gollum. Soon, the 6th graders get involved, taking the tape from the boys to reveal that they've been carrying a copy of Backdoor Sluts 9 this whole time. There's a great scene here where Randy and Sharon tell the other parents, and the dads just start ranking off other pornos while the wives look at them all disappointed.
I mean, was it like Crotch Capers 3?
I'm afraid it was Backdoor Sluts 9. Backdoor Sluts 9?
While the boys try to figure out a plan, the 6th grader recruits all of the others in town to try and steal the tape from the boys. The council decides that it'd be best to just return the movie to the Two Towers video store, forming the Fellowship of the Lord of the Rings. By this point, Token has also seen the film and quits playing, causing the parents to try to talk to him about it.
And when the woman has 4 penises in her at the same time, then stands over the men and pees on them, is that part of being in love too?
Yes.
And then when Token's dad finds out what movie it was, his wife just gives him the same look. It's just so good. Alright, back to the boys. They're on their way to return the movie when they're ambushed by the 6th graders. Jimmy sacrifices himself as the stand-in Gandalf while the boys escape, only for it to completely fail because he's Jimmy. By some miracle, the boys are able to return the tape and their parents come to save the day just as they're about to get beat up by the 6th graders. If the episode ended here, it'd be great, but being South Park, there's always a way to one-up the scene. And in this case, it's done by the parents thinking the kids had all been watching Backdoor Sluts 9, and then just info-dumping all of these kinks onto the boys who haven't watched the tape. It's just golden. None of that can be played though, or I'll be deplatformed, so just use your imagination or go watch it for yourself. There's 2 episodes tied for the lowest ranking of the season. Fun with Veal, and Freak Strike, both at a 7.9 out of 10. I'll do a quick rundown of both and save some time, but don't expect any breakdowns or anything like that, just a light overview, starting with Fun with Veal. Stan learns what veal is and becomes a vegetarian. He then coaxes his friends into stealing a bunch of calves and takes them hostage in his bedroom. The parents try to starve the boys out, but Eric's mom just keeps sneaking them snacks and supplies. This leads to an epic multi-day standoff between the boys and the parents, the police, and the FBI, all culminating with them attempting to flee the area with Mr. Worf as their getaway driver. Naturally, they're captured, but not before it's revealed that the veal market has gone dry, effectively saving the calves in the process. Alright, on to Freak Strike. I personally really like this episode, but apparently that's a hot take. The boys disguise Butters as a mutant to go on the Maury Povich show and try to win some shit, only for Butters to win a free round of mini golf. This causes Cartman to act like a psychotic child so he can get on the show, which is hilarious in and of itself. While that's going on, there's a bunch of freak shows who make a living by going on the talk show circuits. So they end up going on strike along with Butters, who they haven't realized is just faking everything. The strike ends up working, but Cartman, pissed that Butters just screwed him out of a prize, rips off his fake face balls, revealing the con to all of the other freaks. But these guys are idiots, and think Cartman literally ripped the balls off of Butters, so they just go after him instead, allowing Butters to get off scot-free. Until he's grounded by his parents.
Butterscotch free.
My personal favorite episode of Season 6 is Aspen. The whole gang, including parents, head out to Aspen for some skiing. There's only one catch here. The parents need to visit a timeshare presentation, leaving the boys to do some ski lessons on the bunny slope. This is where my favorite part comes in. It's another classic scene that me and my friends still repeat to this day. Hell, I even mention it on streams and videos over on the main channel from time to time. Just remember not to french fry when you're supposed to pizza, or you'll end up like Ike.
Oh.
Back to the timeshare plot though. It's your standard run-of-the-mill timeshare pitch. And if you've never been to one of these, you may think it's a bit over the top, but I can assure you that's exactly how these things go. And you can trust me on this because when my wife and I went to Jamaica last year, she accidentally signed us up for one, and we had to sit through this same goddamn pitch for like 3 hours straight, and then they hounded us about it every fucking day for the entire week. Quite literally ruined the trip for us. So never go to one of these. They're so stupid. They're just for old white people to pretend to flex to their kids on Facebook with. Alright, back to Aspen. Your standard skier gets jealous of Stan and challenges him to a ski-off, naming him Stan Darsh. The parents finally get a chance to go skiing, and even get to skip the line to use the exclusive timeshare lift, only for it to deliver them right into another building for another pitch. Alright, back to Stan. He's challenged again, so he hits up the instructor for a Rocky-styled sports training montage. During the big race, Tad, the man who challenged him, is kicking Stan's ass until he's distracted by some titties, which, I feel that. This causes Stan to win and allows Aspen to keep their youth center. The parents end up buying a timeshare to come to Aspen 2 weeks every year, but the boys just kind of feel like everyone else when it comes to skiing. Have to go back to this dude. Casa Bonita is another all-time classic. It's got a 9.2 on IMDb, and I think it's one of the more memorable episodes in the entire series. Kyle gets to invite 3 friends to go to Casa Bonita with him for his birthday, but he doesn't invite Cartman because Eric's been an ass to him for ages, taking Butters instead. This causes Eric to craft a scheme where he effectively kidnaps Butters by convincing him he's in the beginning of Fallout 4, and having him hide in the nearby Doomsday bunker. Obviously, he doesn't tell anyone about this, so Butters doesn't show, and Kyle invites Cartman instead. Though that's short-lived, as Butters' parents think he's missing, which leads to Kyle postponing the Casa Bonita trip to help search for him. To prevent anyone from finding Butters, Cartman moves him from the bunker to a garbage dump, where he tells Butters he needs to rebuild society to keep him occupied. He also tells him that the world is infested with cannibals to prevent him from leaving the dump. This actually works at first, and Cartman gets to go to Casa Bonita with the gang, until Butters is found by Irene. The police contact Kyle's mom, who calls out Eric, but it's too late, and Eric sprints into Casa Bonita, eating some of the food, visiting Black Bart's cave, and diving off a waterfall.
This is South Park versus Family Guy, a completely unnecessary examination. Now, as much as we all have our personal preferences, let's not pretend that both of these shows are not, at least on some level, funny. Both have been running for over 20 years for a reason. They have episodes with excellent premises, iconic characters, and laugh-out-loud moments. They even have a lot in common. But the writing teams, philosophies, skills, and styles are very, very different. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is Family Guy's style of comedy writing? Unlike most other animated series, Family Guy merges linear storytelling with surrealistic comedy asides and cutaway gags. This means that Family Guy does tell a story, just like The Simpsons, American Dad, and South Park. But in the middle of its story, it may unexpectedly drift aside to have fun showing what other characters are doing, even though it's irrelevant to the plot. For example, here, the story starts with the Griffins competing in a boat race against Lois's father Carter, but then the starting gun is allegedly shot by recently paroled presidential assassin John Hinckley, and Jodie Foster randomly enters the gag to compliment his shooting skills.
Maybe I was wrong about you. Maybe I was wrong about all men.
Or here, the story involves Chris being the frontman for a rebellious rock group, and when he jumps into the crowd, falls through the floor, and unexpectedly discovers Mayor Adam West playing poker with a group of dogs. Or they may set up a cutaway, in which one of the lead characters introduces a random memory, such as, like the time I did blank.
I haven't felt this out of place since that week I lived with Superman.
You remember that time I gave you apple juice and told you it was wine?
Like that time I out-farted Michael Moore.
Or stating an unusual idea so they can then show it to the audience.
Saturday I'm giving Javier Bardem a haircut.
Oh, and if Cookie Monster calls, tell him I am not talking to him until he gets out of rehab.
Like inviting a turtle to a cocktail party.
All of this makes Family Guy fast-paced and feels more like a variety show of random jokes, not committed to a single theme or storyline. Like any form of humor, the joke derives from defying the audience's expectations. Sometimes through meta-humor, meaning they break the fourth wall and talk directly to the audience about the show they're watching.
No clip? Nope, thought we had a clip. Nope, okay.
Sometimes with surrealist asides that we couldn't possibly see coming. Sometimes through musical numbers. Sometimes through extreme inappropriate behavior, like grown-ups acting like children, or children acting like grown-ups. Sometimes through breaking away from the narrative for a long, drawn-out, realistic moment, like when Peter hurts his knee. Or dragging out a scene in which all the characters nod to one another for a full minute in their Star Wars episode. In these cases, the joke stems from satirizing traditional storytelling, which often leaves out these imperfect moments, like stubbing your toe, using the toilet, or fumbling a social interaction, which we all know happen in real life all the time.
Oh yeah.
And the joke is that it goes on for so long, in a format that usually demands brevity, whereas here they're defying your expectations by essentially wasting the viewer's time, but in a way that hopefully becomes increasingly funny the longer it persists, as it's breaking convention. But despite what Parker and Stone claim, Family Guy usually has at least one, sometimes two storylines per episode, with a beginning, middle, and end, such as Peter gets a maid that Quagmire falls in love with, Brian and Stewie join the army, Lois becomes a model, and so on. The chaotic variety show structure of Family Guy is a stylistic choice, as Seth MacFarlane has proved that he can create fantastic animated series that follow a linear structure, such as American Dad. In essence, Family Guy's style is limitless. There's never a reason they cannot create or insert a joke into any story at any time to earn a laugh. But by contrast, South Park's comedy writing is a mixture of social commentary, shock value, and absurdism, told in a linear structure. A typical episode of South Park is written with a clear theme in mind, and the story and jokes never deviate from that theme. For example, if the episode is about getting older or psychics, every scene ties into that theme, moving the story forward, while finding humor through the absurd possibilities of the concept. Even in the Cartoon Wars episode, rather than outright telling you what they want you to believe, it gets expressed through the story and characters. For instance, Cartman wants to help Kyle get the Family Guy joke taken off the air, as once one joke is taken down, then every other group has a right to complain and the show will sink, clearly reflecting their attitude to free speech and entertainment, that either everything is okay or nothing is. And they also make the town decide that the best way to show they don't support the joke is to physically stick their heads in the sand. All of this ties neatly into the theme of free speech, and raises the question, what makes a joke acceptable or unacceptable? while simultaneously, Parker and Stone are ironically declaring Family Guy's jokes as unworthy as they don't meet their personal standards. So it's tackling its theme from multiple perspectives. The benefit of writing each episode with a clear theme is that it's very easy to remember which episode each joke is from, as your mind can catalogue it in context of the surrounding story. Whereas with Family Guy, most cutaways could be swapped with the cutaways from another episode, and it would make no difference whatsoever. Family Guy is harder to mentally catalogue.
I would say Family Guy, so far, is the funnier of the two because I like their cutaway gags.
As the actual storyline is often the least compelling part of the episode, as they have so many hilarious, unexpected, or memorable side pieces that your mind can't really remember what the point of any of it was. In Parker and Stone's rulebook, good comedic storytelling demands that your jokes are compatible with the story at hand, and not just random gags.
Whenever we're bringing in new writers, we always know the gaggy writers, right? Which are the ones that no matter what you're talking about and how deep of an issue or whatever character arc or whatever it is, they're just throwing out a gag. And it's just like, yeah, and then he says this. And it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That has nothing to do with that character. You're just throwing out a gag randomly.
This means the key fundamental difference in their comedy stylings is that Family Guy is limitless. It can and will randomly insert anything it thinks is funny to keep the audience entertained and along for the ride.
Yeah, I like
Whereas South Park views that as cheap and easy, that the real craft of writing is limiting yourself and ensuring that the jokes fit with the character arcs and theme.
I never looked at it like that. The cutaway gag is my favorite part.
But what does Seth MacFarlane say about cutaways?
It's the cutaways specifically that they really, I guess, don't think are... They don't see that as a legitimate form of comedy. It's funny, those are the hardest things to write. You know, you're coming up with a premise that has to be set up and pay off in a short amount of time. You're just starting from scratch.
Not unlike Parker and Stone, MacFarlane believes his method of writing is the hardest, as it requires coming up with a premise and payoff independent of the story in order to earn the laugh. But is that true?
I believe it's true, personally.
Let's take this cutaway gag as an example. Lois is angry that Peter encouraged Joe to have an affair, and then randomly Stewie interjects,
"Well, we've all made mistakes."
And we cut to Stewie walking through a door that says not an exit, and unexpectedly, a gorilla pops out and attacks him. So is MacFarlane's claim here that this premise on its own is hard to come up with and pay off in such a short time?
I never liked this cutaway gag.
If that's the case, it's a simple enough concept. We never get to know what's behind a not an exit door as we don't get to use it. So why don't they specify what it is rather than what it isn't? So they illustrate that by putting something random and dangerous behind the doorway. Ha ha. Or is his claim that it's funnier to cut away than just being restricted to that one scene in that one story? Because if that's the case, then Parker and Stone's criticism is that the joke is completely irrelevant, and therefore acts as nothing but a distraction from your narrative's shortcomings. For instance, if you were reading George Orwell's 1984, and every now and then when he runs out of good material, he just spliced in random highlight segments from Animal Farm, would that detract from the story? Or be considered even better writing, because now it's all good material? Or is comedy writing for TV to be considered the same as stand-up comedy, where anything goes? That some comedians tie all their jokes together, and others just do one-liners? Does one require more skill than the other? Or is the only metric that matters how many laughs you actually get? South Park's claim is that Family Guy writers could not, or just did not, write a connecting scene between Lois and Peter's conversation about cheating to Stewie walking through a not an exit door and getting attacked by a gorilla, as surely that would be much more difficult, if not impossible. So by skipping those story beats, they've essentially cheated. That the jolt of shock and limitless nature makes the joke writing easy and the joke itself meaningless, as the only necessary connection to the cutaway was the word mistake. This is what Parker and Stone mean when they say the jokes are interchangeable, that you could randomly edit them into other Family Guy episodes without feeling out of place. Let's imagine South Park did the same thing. In the episode where Stan makes friends with a Mormon family, if he returned home and told his family about them, like in the normal script, and then instead of engaging in the story, Randy first responded with, "Well, we all make mistakes," And then we just cut to that funny scene from another episode where Randy tries to act sober when he's pulled over by the cops.
What seems to be the officer problem?
Would that scene be just as funny in any context? Or does it work best within the confines of that story about Randy drinking too much? It's certainly more memorable when it's in the context of a complete story, but as an independent gag, admittedly it is still pretty funny in either format. But just how often do Family Guy do this? Having researched 20 random episodes in the first 10 seasons, including TV segments that essentially act as cutaways and not including random asides, they typically averaged 7 to 12 cutaway sketches per episode. And these cutaways can last anywhere between 5 seconds and 5 minutes, as they can have a quick smash cut gag, or do an extensive sequence, like Peter fighting the chicken for a full 5 minutes.
Ooh, yeah,
so
like
it's either
that.
a drive-by gag and it's gone, or a lengthy when will this ever end type of gag.
That's like one of my favorite cutaways is the mime on mime violence. When he holds him at gunpoint and then shoots him and it actually does damage in the end.
That becomes legendary just because of how long it's taking. But think about it, in a 21-minute episode, we are dedicating large portions of it to irrelevant gags. And let's be honest, some cutaways seem to be inserted just to waste the audience's time, like my personal pet peeve, the Conway Twitty cutaways, in which they insert a segment of the country singer performing for what feels like an eternity. They do this in more than 5 episodes, and I've yet to meet a single human being that actually finds it funny. In the most indefensible segment, they play a full song of his for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and the audience is just meant to endure this and somehow appreciate it as comedic genius. A quick cutaway gag that doesn't land is no big deal, as it's an immediate hit or miss and we move on. But when this joke doesn't land, it keeps not landing for almost 3 full minutes. Surely this is a prime example of what Parker and Stone mean when they say the writers need to work harder.
What makes me disappointed about Family Guy is I think it could be an amazing show. I think they're really, you can tell they're smart people working on it.
I don't think they work hard enough.
Yeah, they need to work harder.
As the audience tuned in to watch Family Guy, not just Conway Twitty performing for over 12% of the episode. Now from what I can tell, my angry reaction is the joke, that you don't want it, but you're being forced to watch it. In which case, fine. But then McFarlane can't justify this with his earlier claim that these are actually harder jokes to write, as they require a complete setup and payoff of their own. Which leads to the next question. Are the cutaway sketches actually even funny? Or is it just so random and unexpected that it tricks your brain into thinking it is? Like this pointless cutaway in which Peter pitches Crystal Pepsi.
You won't be able to see him past your Pepsi. And then who's dead, huh? You're dead. Stabbed. Crystal Pepsi.
Stabbed.
Yeah, that's funny, right? Because it's inappropriate to say that at a pitch meeting. But why interrupt the episode for this? Why Crystal Pepsi? Why any of it?
Because they love us. That's why.
Let's use this cutaway as an example. The setup is that Brian being hit must hurt worse than receiving a birthday telegram from Zinedine Zidane. The pop culture reference is that Zidane famously headbutted a fellow footballer in the World Cup. And the joke is imagining he did that as a birthday telegram.
That's funny.
But how would... okay.
That's funny.
But in that moment, your brain connects the tiny bit of information you know about him, and the surprise of it happening at all.
That is funny.
And then we're just on to the next scene, like it didn't even happen.
Yeah.
South Park famously portrayed the Family Guy writing staff as a group of manatees randomly selecting a series of idea balls. Each ball contains a verb, noun, or pop culture reference and combine to make a cutaway gag. So for this cutaway, the balls would be hurt, old lady, birthday gift, and Zinedine Zidane. None of these words or ideas intrinsically belong in a sentence.
How do we make a gag out of Justin Bieber giving mouth to South to Odell Beckham using these same 4 balls? It's not weird because there's 4 of them. The more you know.
Together, which is why the joke is funny. Or for this cutaway, farts, Michael Moore, competition, and music. But not all cutaways are irrelevant to the story. Sometimes they're thematically tied together, or at least relevant to the new setting the characters inhabit.
That's funny.
And despite being random, it doesn't mean that these cutaway gags are never funny. as some of these segments are undeniably Family Guy at its best.
That's funny.
But as much as we can focus on the differences between Family Guy and South Park, it cannot be denied that there are similarities.
I am nothing like Family Guy.
Both shows involve toilet humor, social commentary, musical numbers, and even some of the same gags, just told differently, or for different periods of time. In 2004, South Park created a joke that the detective doesn't arrest a serial killer with chopped off hands on his wall, as they're looking for left hands, and these appear to be right hands, as they're turned over with the thumb facing the other way. So rather than arresting the guy with chopped off hands on his wall, he leaves, as he's not the guy. But he is suspicious, so for a full minute, there's a montage of him researching in a lab, and even getting distracted along the way, until he realizes what the audience already knew all along. This is actually quite a Family Guy style joke, where they drag out the gag for as long as possible. But the context of the story raises the stakes so it's even funnier, as the detective is in a position of authority and Cartman's life depends on him. So the joke lands harder because it's not just wasting our time, it's wasting Cartman's precious time. Compare that to a similar joke Family Guy made in 2000. Peter is hoping to find one of 4 remaining tickets to the brewery tour. Now that one is gone, he has to figure out how many are left. So they do a quick 10-second montage of him at a lab, performing random tasks, and then when he returns from his research,
this many!
He doesn't even have the number, just holds up his hand with 3 fingers.
That's funny.
The joke is quicker, and defies our expectations at the end, as Peter still doesn't know the number 3, and can only hold up his fingers, making all his research pointless, as he was initially counting on his fingers anyway. But which joke is funnier? South Park's is dragged out for longer, but is part of the story and has higher stakes. Or Family Guy's quick 10-second gag, with a punchline achieving all the same greatness with no major stakes. There is no right and wrong, they're both just silly gags, but it's about how much you value its relevance to the storyline.
If this were the laugh event in the Hood Olympics, right now Family Guy would be in a very, very comfortable lead.
But similarities go beyond just individual gags. Let's compare how each show tells essentially the same story, with virtually identical conclusions.
Really?
South Park's Bloody Mary and Family Guy's Friends of Peter G. Both episodes involve a character getting arrested for being drunk, going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and at the end, concluding that moderation is key. In South Park, there's a total of 15 scenes. The boys learn about the concept of discipline in their karate class. Then Randy arrives drunk to drive the boys home, displaying he has no discipline, and gets arrested. In school, Randy brings shame to Stan by talking to the class about his drunk driving. In his AA meeting, Randy doesn't believe he's an alcoholic, but is told he's powerless and has a disease. Therefore, when Stan comes home, Randy is on the couch hopelessly drinking, playing the victim. They then introduce a bleeding statue of the Virgin Mary being discovered by a priest, which Randy sees on the news. Stan goes to the AA meeting to say you messed with my dad by saying he has a disease, he just needs discipline, which as you can see, ties back to scene 1. The story progresses as a Vatican member comes to see the statue of Mary and calls it a miracle. So needing a miracle of his own, Randy now must see the statue and wants to drunk drive there. Stan stops him and is made drive instead. Randy sees a line of people wanting to be cured of serious diseases like cancer and elephantitis. He skips the queue as he now equates his alcoholism with their issues. The statue bleeds on his face, so Randy believes he's cured by a miracle, therefore he now acts deeply religious. Then when he has pizza with his AA group, a TV reports that the Pope says it's actually not a miracle. So Randy loses faith and starts drinking again, as he believes he's powerless, linking back to his first AA meeting. But Stan stops him outside and says if it wasn't a miracle, then it proves that he did successfully quit drinking by himself. This teaches him that moderation requires discipline, again linking back to scene 1 at karate class, and we're done. So as you can see, each scene leads directly into the next and always progresses the story forward. The very first scene informs us of the lesson of the episode, and by having Randy believe anything he's told by authority figures, it allows Parker and Stone to provide real social commentary on the issue of drinking. The jokes are all based on Randy being a drunken fool, or playing the victim, or commenting on AA's explicit ties to organized religion. Now let's see how Family Guy dealt with the exact same theme and lesson. They did it in 17 scenes. Peter and Brian go to the cinema, and we get a funny aside about how studio logo intros are hard to decipher from the movie actually starting. They decide to get drunk and there's commotion, and they end up arrested by Joe. They go to court and are sentenced to 30 days of AA. Over breakfast, Brian expresses that AA is stupid, a random cutaway gag of an old poet writing the rap lyrics to Kanye West's Gold Digger. At their first AA meeting, Peter listens to other people's stories and then tells his own, which is a cutaway of him drunk driving through a waterslide. Back to the AA meeting, there's talk of a higher power, which causes Brian to push back because he's an atheist, which earns another cutaway, showing how everyone was peaceful before religion came along. Then Lois asks about how it went. Brian and Peter complain about AA and think really what everyone needs is a place to drink shamelessly. So they bring booze to the next AA meeting and everyone gets drunk. Joe goes to the AA meeting due to a noise complaint, which ties Joe back in from the opening scene. They quickly convert the room to looking like a sermon for AA. Peter sings the upbeat song Mr. Booze for several minutes. After that, everyone is drunk outside, and Peter decides to drive home and crashes his car. Death comes and shows him where his life is headed if he keeps drinking, starting with him lining up his family to burn with a cigar, then sleeping with his unattractive boss Angela, then showing what it would be like if Peter never drank at all. Instead, he's lining up his family to hug them instead of burning them. But he no longer has Quagmire and Joe as friends, so he hates both outcomes and learns to drink in moderation. It ends with a cutaway gag of two seagulls at the dump drinking his thrown away beers. There are several differences between both storytelling styles, even though they both ultimately conclude the same message. Firstly, South Park has no cutaways or asides, so we can cut out 5 of Family Guy's segments right off the bat, meaning less time is dedicated to the actual story. The next is that South Park introduces its core message from the very opening scene with the boys at karate class, whereas Family Guy has no message until it's shoehorned in at the end when Peter, like Ebenezer Scrooge, is shown what his life could be like if he doesn't stop drinking so much. They also don't give Brian any revelation or conclusion at all, even though he was attending AA too. Thirdly, tone-wise, Family Guy takes its theme much less seriously.
I feel like they're both awesome shows, you know what I'm saying? Like, I watch them both.
Instead, it has a 3.5-minute song, Mr. Booze, that's very upbeat and playful for a song about quitting drinking. Whereas South Park delves into the psychology of AA's messaging and how it could be teaching its members a form of learned helplessness. But what this exercise does expose is that Parker and Stone's claim that Family Guy jokes are never relevant to the story is false, as whether it's a song or a cutaway, most of the episode is spent on the same theme. Really, Family Guy is spinning 2 plates at the same time, jokes that work within their story, and then when they don't have something good enough, divert to jokes outside their story. However, it's hard not to see Parker and Stone's point, that when some episodes have 12 cutaway gags, that it meaningfully detracts from the story. But does that therefore make it bad storytelling? Well, part of great writing is ensuring that everything works in tandem. When you read a great story, you don't necessarily realize it right away, but on closer inspection, usually the theme was subtly present on each page, so that the story makes sense to you on an emotional level without needing to be spelled out to you yet on an intellectual level. You feel something about the characters and the theme, and the story then may present to you something that either confirms that message or contrasts it, to make you feel like the outcome was even more of an injustice. In great comedy writing, typically it's that the premise alone is funny enough to create numerous comedic opportunities, and the characters are all so unique that you can select the right ones for each story to maximize its potential. So let's look at storytelling done right when there's more than one storyline. In TV writing, these are typically an A story and a B story. In South Park's You're Getting Old, the theme of the episode is about time changing your taste. We start with Stan turning 10 years old and receiving a Tweenwave album. His mother doesn't want him listening to that shitty music, whereas Randy used to want to be a rock star, so pretends to understand its merits. The story then diverges, with Randy trying to act younger than he is by liking modern music, while Stan can't help that he's suddenly hating all the stuff that he used to love. But Randy's refusal to let go of his dream highlights that actually he and Sharon have lost interest in one another over time and grown apart. And now Stan, who has already been losing friends, has to watch his family break apart as they're changing too, all triggered from that album he got as a gift in the opening scene. Stan is the A story, Randy is the B story, they both meet at the beginning, separate, and then merge at the end. Or in the case of Miss Teacher Bangs a Boy, the A story is that Ike begins a romantic relationship with his teacher, and the B story is that Cartman becomes the hall monitor at school. And when Kyle catches Ike and lets it slip to Cartman that they've been making out in the hallways, the stories merge, and now Cartman makes it his mission to stop them. Not because what she's doing is morally wrong, but because it's against the school rules that he's enforcing. And the school rules and people's differing attitudes to them are the theme of both storylines, so it's all neatly tied together.
Nice.
This isn't unique to South Park. Family Guy can do this too. In Season 3's Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows, the A story is that Brian falls into depression from loneliness and winds up caring for a cranky elderly woman who he falls in love with, while the B story involves Peter growing a beard that attracts swallows to use as a nest. He can't get rid of them at first, but then falls in love with them and won't let them leave. And then thematically, the two stories mirror one another at the end, as Brian has to learn to let go of Pearl as she passes away from old age, and Peter has to learn to let go and release the birds back into the wild, which is beautiful thematic continuity.
That's pretty.
But is that really how most Family Guy episodes are written? For the first 3 seasons, often yes, although most episodes only have one story per episode, but after that, rarely.
Yeah, that food looked
For
good.
example, in Season 4, Lois becomes a model, while Brian gets worms and has to work for Stewie.
Oh.
There is no connection between these two storylines. They start separate, end separate, and that's it. Or in Season 5, Brian and Stewie join the army, while Chris joins a rock band. These stories have nothing linking them together. No theme, no plot, no nothing. But what is interesting is how Family Guy's writing has evolved over the last 15 years. I researched 3 episodes in Season 20, and to my surprise, there were very few cutaway jokes at all. I counted just 2, 4, and 3, so they've cut the number of cutaway jokes in half. So does this mean that the storytelling is better? Emotionally, perhaps, but entertainment-wise, not really. There is more time dedicated to the emotional experience of each character, but if anything, the show feels flatter than before. The characters are often just sitting around talking to one another instead of being more active or doing something funny. And although every episode has an A and B story, none of them are connected whatsoever. This could just be the result of being on air for over 20 years, but depending on your personal preference, you could say that this is evidence that Parker and Stone were wrong, that the show is much funnier with random cutaway gags.
It is, yeah.
Or you could claim it's evidence that they were totally right, that once you strip away the shiny glitter of random cutaways, that the writers have little to offer comedically. So in conclusion, were Trey Parker and Matt Stone's claims that Family Guy is poorly written accurate? Well, on the front of the cutaway jokes being interchangeable, the answer is yes, they usually are. And are the cutaway jokes just random combinations of words that could be created by manatees selecting balls? Sometimes yes, but that doesn't mean that the jokes themselves are never funny. And are Family Guy's jokes never relevant to the story? No, they often are. They're just blended with irrelevant jokes, which makes the story itself less memorable. And finally, does Family Guy tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end? Yes, but sometimes that story feels secondary to the gags, and therefore the character development feels unearned. Ironically, in South Park's Cartoon Wars, they depicted Family Guy as the show that would get into trouble for showing the Prophet Muhammad. But in 2010, it was actually Parker and Stone who found themselves in trouble over the exact same issue in their 200th episode. And Seth MacFarlane got to commentate on the sidelines, revealing his personal feelings on whether or not jokes can go too far.
There's no way to know. If it were me and I was in this situation, it was like, well, is this worth getting shot? Right. Is it the funniest joke anyone's ever written?
But
okay,
did they know
Fox,
that
if you want to censor this.
Which again speaks to the difference in both writing philosophies. Trey Parker and Matt Stone are more principled, that either everything is okay or nothing is okay, but that there are rules to storytelling that need to be obeyed to ensure you're telling a worthwhile story.
Yeah.
This is a more puritanical view, that storytelling has a higher purpose and responsibility. whereas Seth MacFarlane is more pragmatic. Whatever works to keep the audience entertained is fair game, and if some jokes are going to cause real-world trouble, then who cares? Cut them. After all, they're just jokes. But perhaps he only feels that way, as his jokes are more interchangeable and less intentioned. So after all of this, what do you think? Is it really worse comedy writing to include funny jokes that aren't relevant to the story? Or is it better comedy writing to complete a linear story with thematic continuity, but fewer funny jokes? The easy answer that most people will give is both, but the real question is, what's more important? And ultimately, in the battle between South Park and Family Guy, who do you think is better?
Got himself some employment.
In the small town of South Park, Colorado, a young boy was born to a single mother of meager means. A boy that would go on to exemplify the most selfish and manipulative qualities known to man. A boy who would stop at nothing to get what he wants. He would lead movements, deceive friends, play the victim, gaslight, coerce, and intimidate anyone who got in his way. With no quantifiable moral compass outside of his fear of getting in trouble. In many ways, this boy could be described as pure evil. But how does he inflict his wicked will upon the world? Let's examine the manipulative tactics of Eric Theodore Cartman over 26 seasons of South Park. The first thing to understand about Eric Cartman is that he has a penchant for instant gratification. Whatever he wants it now, and rarely thinks about the consequences of his actions beyond the fulfillment of that immediate desire. He's selfish and superficial, always wanting to be part of the coveted in-group, so he can not only relish his acceptable position, but derive pleasure from excluding others. For example, we repeatedly see him mock Kyle for being a step behind in the latest trend. Whether he doesn't have the latest Chin Pokemon toy, hasn't had his period yet, or isn't metrosexual enough. The jealousy and exclusion of others boosts Eric's sense of self-worth and is therefore one of his key motivations. To the point when the town needs his help to get rid of the hippies, his only demand is that he's given the latest radio-controlled bulldozer toy as long as Kyle can never have one, and he's forced to watch him play with it. So if he can't organically make Kyle feel left out, he'll artificially manipulate the same outcome, demonstrating his complete lack of ethical consideration for how anything is achieved, as long as his personal desire is fulfilled.
That is so shitty. No, he can't have one. I'll play with it.
This leads us into the first key victim of his manipulation, his mother. Eric quickly identifies other people's weaknesses as a means of controlling them. So knowing his mother has no man in her life, she needs him not just for a sense of purpose, but to keep her company. This weakness blinds her to the fact that he's simultaneously the instigator and solution to all of her problems.
But, man, I have to get a Chin Pokemon doll before everybody else does, because then I'll be cool.
So in order to get what he wants, he just has to cry, moan, or put on a soft voice, and sooner or later she'll cave and give in to his desires. This goes beyond just food and toys. In season 11, he even puppet masters her to retrieve the explicit photo of him with Butter's privates in his mouth, as he believes Kyle secretly has it and will show everyone in school. If for any reason his mother doesn't give him what he wants, he'll stop at nothing to destroy her. We see this when she simply can't afford to buy him an iPad for his birthday. And not only does he break down in public, he tells a police officer she's abusing him and then drags her onto Dr. Phil to claim he's a victim of abuse to publicly shame her into caving.
Oh.
By creating such harsh consequences,
goddamn Duke's top 5 videos, man.
for ever crossing him, Eric is manipulating a world in which everyone is better off just giving him what he wants without hesitation, as it's the path of least resistance. This is because Cartman has no loyalty to the truth. Words are a mere obstacle in the way of his desires. For instance, what would you do for $100? I might be overestimating you, but probably not much. But for Eric Cartman, when the police believe he's psychic and offer him a small cash prize for every criminal he uncovers, he's happy to lock up innocent civilians, or have the police literally kill off his competition.
He's swatting people?
Deceit, as long as it's in service of personal gain, is one of his favorite strategies.
No, that doesn't
When he's
work.
a part of David Blaine's cult and Kyle is having doubts about sacrificing himself for the cause, Eric pretends he's on the same page and safe for his friend to confide in, only to betray him so he can enjoy being the one to personally extinguish Kyle's life. These extreme decisions showcase how little Eric values anyone beyond himself, but also how far he's willing to bend the truth. We see the level of detail he puts into his lies when the boys are about to be interrogated for their involvement in toilet papering a teacher's house, and Cartman has constructed a fully comprehensive alibi for them all to follow. Last night, all four of us were at the bowling alley until about 7:30, at which time we noticed Ali Sheedy, the goth chick from the Breakfast Club, was bowling in the lane next to us, and we asked her for her autograph, but she didn't have a pen, so we followed her out to her car, but on the way we were accosted by 5 Scientologists who wanted to give us all personality tests, which were administered at the Scientology Center in Denver until 10:45, at which time we accidentally boarded the wrong bus home and ended up in Rancho de Burritos Rojas, south of Castle Rock, and finally got a ride home with a man who was missing his left index finger named Gary Bushwell, arriving home around 11:46.
Damn.
Because there's nothing Eric Cartman won't say or do to weasel his way out of trouble, to the point that as long as he evades punishment, he's unburdened by the immorality of his actions. In Eric's mind, if you get away with a crime, then you basically didn't do anything wrong. So once he's had his fun, Eric will always try to shirk responsibility onto someone else. We see examples of this throughout the series, like when the boys get caught writing a disturbingly dirty book, Cartman gaslights Butters into believing he wrote it while he was sleepwalking. Or when they accidentally support a baby-murdering serial killer as a way to draw attention to their cause of stopping directors from re-releasing their movies with updated special effects, once confronted on the immorality of their support, Cartman instantly makes Tweak their official spokesperson so his name is attached to the bad parts of the movement rather than him. Or after lying to Stan that his fake Uncle Roy won't mind them taking out his boat, once Stan crashes into a dam and floods the entire town, Eric quickly distances himself from the major role he had to play so that Stan is left to carry the weight of responsibility.
Dude, Stan, you are in serious trouble.
There's simply no low he will not stoop to in order to clear his name. The best example of this is after being the obvious ringleader in toilet papering their teacher's house and spending the entire episode intimidating Kyle out of confessing so they can receive a lesser sentence, once the other boys all decide to turn themselves in because it's the right thing to do, Cartman manipulatively slides in before them to take the credit for the confession so that he's let off the hook and they're left behind to be punished. Strategically, this is a genius move, as once he sees the writing on the wall, he essentially steals their moral epiphany and shields himself with it, as Cartman understands that the world doesn't really care if you actually believe in what you're doing, as long as you appear to have done the right thing. As appearances can be deceiving, which leads into Cartman's favourite technique of manipulating the world around him, playing the victim.
Yeah, that's job.
Unlike Eric, most human beings have empathy and a moral compass. They see someone in need and they try to do what's right. So in order to acquire the help he needs, Cartman will turn on the waterworks to mobilize others into action. Whether it's manipulating his cellmate into helping him escape, even though he won't return the favor later, or creating a fake sob story to pull on the heartstrings of Hollywood execs so they'll take Family Guy off the air. If for whatever reason someone won't give him what he wants, Eric will then turn the tables on his opponent and cry the wolf whistle of discrimination, despite the fact that he actively gets off on discriminating others whenever he gets the chance.
Dude, tolerance kicks ass!
That's our Cartman.
Ultimately, Cartman is a reflection of the very worst aspects of human nature. When society creates a new rule, law, or program for those in need, there's always the argument that what if someone sinister tries to take advantage of such an incentive structure? And reasonable lawmakers will respond, but who would really go out of their way to do such a thing, when 99% of the targeted group really need it? The answer is Eric Cartman. From the perspective of a manipulative mastermind, your good intentions are a mere loophole for him to slip through, as if anyone tries to question him, he can simply defend himself with the narrative of those for which the rule was designed to help.
I've got a golden ticket.
These loopholes allow Eric to pretend he has Tourette syndrome to get away with saying whatever he wants, claim he identifies as a girl to have his own gender-neutral bathroom built for him in school, embrace an anxiety diagnosis so he can be rude, lazy and lame to everyone around him, avoid getting vaccinated by claiming he's a conscientious objector, and once he succumbs to the temptation of a mobility scooter, he then uses it to throw his weight around, demanding that companies create special accessible bathrooms just for him or be hit with a hefty lawsuit. For an amoral, selfish actor like Cartman, the world is a playground of possibility. You just have to know which political levers to pull to your advantage.
Pretty much. I never learned any of that stuff though. I like video games.
Eric is always willing to make himself the face of a movement, even if he only discovered it 5 seconds ago and has never really been the victim of anything. He operates exclusively out of ego. It's always all about him, and everyone else is just a casualty along the way. For instance, in Season 9, he begins a hate movement against gingers, claiming they have no soul. Then once Kyle and Stan trick him by making him ginger, he then becomes the leader of another movement, to kill all non-gingers as revenge for how badly they've mistreated him over the last few days, unable to see any contradiction in his actions. He's just always been directing hate in whatever direction is away from himself. Today it's gingers, tomorrow it's non-gingers. Once he discovers he's not actually ginger, he now must manipulate his followers with a phoned-in revelation. So he starts a catchy Live and Let Live song to defuse the situation, understanding that music is a great way to collectivize large groups of people, as once one or two others join in, everyone else will succumb to the peer pressure and not want to feel left out.
Yup, they just come right in. The sleazy
Eric is a
sounds,
psychological predator. He understands how to attract individuals towards a cause they feel emotionally invested in, and then hijack the movement for his own personal gain. Whether he's turning a Christian rally into an anti-Semitic hate group, or selling old people cheap fake gold that they believe is a valuable gift that they can hand down to their grandchildren after they're gone. He's a natural sleazy salesman. For example, when he's selling tickets to David Blaine's cult, the old lady he's selling to claims she doesn't need to go, as she's a happy person. Eric then insists, "No, you're not," over and over, until she eventually breaks and buys the tickets.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
I really am.
No, you're not.
But I am.
No, you're not.
All right, 2 tickets.
No.
By stubbornly insisting she's unhappy, he's causing his target to have to examine if perhaps there is a part of them that isn't quite as happy as they could be.
Females use this on dudes all the time, and dudes don't even know it. They don't even know it.
Until they concede and just buy whatever he's selling. Another classic, albeit inadvertent, sales tactic Cartman employs is when he buys Cartman Land with the money his grandma left him in her will. His plan is to keep the theme park for himself to enjoy with no lines. But as we noted in the beginning, his pleasure doesn't just stem from the activity itself, but in other people's lack of access to it. It's only fun to him if it's making someone else miserable. Therefore, he advertises the theme park as just for him so that others feel left out. This FOMO creates scarcity and a feeling of exclusivity, making Cartman Land the most wanted ticket in town, so that when he does finally have to let people in to pay for the maintenance of the park, there are thousands of potential buyers just waiting for the opportunity to hand over their hard-earned cash.
But he's unhappy because other people are playing with it. That is so...
There's nothing Cartman won't do or say to fulfill his selfish desires. Whether it's something big, like stealing an election so that he'll be cast in the next Star Wars movie, or something small, like claiming Jimmy is his best friend so he'll let him stay over.
I really need the support of my best friend right now.
To a manipulator, everything is just a means to an end. For example, when his girlfriend Heidi wants to break up with him for pushing her out in front of a car, Eric is on the back foot. He's desperate and will do anything to keep her in his life. He blames his low sugar levels, his mother, anything, until ultimately offering to become vegan to appease her. But rather than making the sacrifice to prove his love to her, due to the existence of vegan meat alternatives, he selfishly chooses to lie to her face and says that he tried them and it's impossible to tell the difference between real meat and fake meat. So now that he's planted this idea that real and fake meat taste the same, he then presents her a bucket of alleged Beyond KFC, so they can eat regular KFC from now on without her even thinking twice. Another dirty psychological trick he plays comes when he wants to manipulate Stan into telling his best friend Kyle that he can't be friends with them anymore, because he's not metrosexual enough.
We're just gonna have to kill Kyle.
To instill fear, Cartman slyly anchors Stan's mind towards the most extreme possible outcome.
You gonna have to kill me, bruh. I ain't putting on no bra for nobody. Definitely not no man panties.
So that Stan will have to take the credit for a more reasonable solution.
We wouldn't have to kill Kyle. We would just have to tell him not to hang around us anymore. Oh, you're right, Stan. We just have to tell Kyle not to hang around us anymore.
I'll just leave.
So by introducing the threat of death, Stan is the one to offer up the idea of ostracizing Kyle, something he would never have naturally volunteered on his own. Because what's the best way to make someone do what you want them to do? Convince them it's what they'd like to do. Kyle is constantly the victim of Cartman's manipulative ploys. When he tells Cartman no one will fall for his idiotic prank that a cow could ever be ginger, he doesn't anticipate that this prank will accidentally create peace in the Middle East. So seeing the positive outcome, he now takes back his criticism, unaware that he's exposing his vulnerability to a devious monster. As by revealing that he values peace in the Middle East so much, Cartman can now turn the tables and test just how much he wants to maintain it by threatening to expose the truth unless Kyle does whatever he says. Because by valuing anything or anyone other than yourself, you've essentially handed him the best weapon to attack you with. We see Cartman pull out every manipulative tool in the box in Season 7, when Kyle doesn't invite him to Casa Bonita for his birthday. He can only bring 3 friends, and he'd rather bring Stan, Kenny and Butters to hang out with instead of the guy that constantly rags on him for being Jewish. Cartman's first instinct is to gaslight Kyle, denying that he's ever insulted his religion. Failing that, he tries a good old-fashioned guilt trip. When that doesn't work, he tries to curry favor by beating up a handicapped kid in front of him, claiming that he was insulting Kyle's mom. Until eventually, after exhausting every other possibility, he acts as if he's accepted that Kyle doesn't want to invite him, and takes responsibility for his past wrongdoing, stating that he just hopes they can still be friends after his birthday. This mature and understanding demonstration wins Kyle over, making him see Cartman in a totally different light. The manipulator has appealed to his target's genuine nature, causing Kyle to reciprocate that he wants them to be friends too. And as a throwaway concession, he says that if for any reason Butters can't make it, then he can come to Casa Bonita in his place. Bingo. This serves as a red rag to a bull. He tried every angle, but finally, he's found his entry point. Which leads us into his most naive and susceptible victim, Butters. There's no one easier to manipulate than someone who always wants to see the best in everyone. And Butters is an eternal optimist. He has no ill will in his heart, so can't conceive of how anyone else might have bad intentions for him. Whereas Eric views Butters as his little plaything, someone he can easily control and use to his own ends. If he wants to uncover his deepest secrets, he'll dress up as his new robot best friend to lure him into a false sense of security. If he wants to mess with him while he's asleep, he'll invite him for a sleepover and offer him cold medicine right away so he can fall asleep even faster. When he needs help exposing Mysterion's true identity, he enlists the help of Butters to be the face of the plot, only to turn on him at the last second so he can take the full credit for saving the day. And when he wants a new home with cool slides and lots of toys, he worms his way into Butters' part-time job, doesn't do any work, and manipulates him into becoming the sole investor of his new business. So now Butters is on the hook for all of the company's extravagant costs.
Pretty much.
Everyone needs a friend like Butters, but not everyone deserves one. Which is why the worst thing that Cartman has ever done to Butters can only be described as the most psychopathic, heartless, and profound degree of gaslighting ever portrayed on television. And
might be the price Cartman charges Butters to kiss him. Don't do that and you won't have to pay no price. I charge $40.
Also, he can have just one day
For the cheap.
at Casa Bonita.
Just a cheap.
Was it worth it?
Totally.
Given Kyle innocently said Cartman can come to his birthday as long as Butters can't go, you might think up cruel but predictable ways that Cartman might take Butters out of the running. Does he spike him? Make him sick? Get him grounded?
Pee on him?
No. Instead, he tricks Butters into believing that Earth is about to be hit by a meteor and he needs to hide in a bomb shelter. He then leaves the petrified little Butters down there for days until a search party commences, delaying the Casa Bonita trip. Not wanting to take responsibility for what he's done, Eric returns to claim that Butters can't come out until the radiation clears, letting him believe that most people, including his parents, have been incinerated. It's hard to truly conceive just how evil this is, and the depths of emotional trauma he's willing to inflict for such a short-lived day of satisfaction. This causes Butters to believe his predatory abuser is actually his hero, going as far as to thank Eric for his sacrifices. Realizing the search party are going to start checking bomb shelters, he returns to his victim. But rather than releasing him, instead he now claims that Earth is plagued with dangerous flesh-eating cannibals, so Butters will need to put a bag over his head, as Eric describes the horrifying imagery around him, until ultimately leading him to an abandoned gas station where he locks him inside a refrigerator and breaks off the handle, with no consideration for Butters' food, water, or oxygen supply. Somehow, his sole priority is still just going to Casa Bonita, riding the rides, and not getting into trouble. But if that's how far this toxic manipulator is willing to go when he holds no animosity towards his victims, what lengths would he go to for revenge? Well, as we saw earlier, despite verbally abusing everyone around him, Cartman cannot stand being the butt of a joke. Like any narcissist, he has a notoriously fragile ego. So when he gets diagnosed with HIV, and Kyle can't help but find the karma of it all funny, Cartman exacts his revenge by injecting Kyle with his blood while he's asleep. He then callously points out that Kyle doesn't find it so funny anymore now that he's infected. Despite the fact that if Kyle had been diagnosed first, he would have laughed in his face too, just like he used to do to gingers before becoming one himself.
He was a ginger?
But the ultimate act of revenge, his most infamous crime, is the manipulation of Scott Tenorman. After foolishly buying Scott's pubic hair for $16.12 because he believed it would mean he could brag about hitting puberty to his friends, Cartman finds himself consistently outmaneuvered. And rather than conceding defeat to an older bully, he chooses a different path. A path so dark that no one could have seen it coming. Rather than trying to beat Scott in a state of reactivity, he realized he would have to think 2 steps ahead of everyone, predicting who would betray him and when, and what Scott would do to avoid ever putting himself at risk. So Eric pitches a plan to his friends to make a pony bite Scott's wiener off, trusting that they'll betray him and warn Scott about his ridiculous strategy. This lures Scott into a false sense of security, and he begins his own manipulative plan. He tells his parents that there's an abandoned pony on Mr. Denkin's land, so they'll bring it to a shelter on his behalf, instantly eliminating any threat to him. This allows Scott to focus on enacting his own revenge. So Cartman uses Scott's greatest strength against him, and because he knows that Scott always looks down on him and feels smarter than him, he never sees it coming. That knowing Mr. Denkins shoots trespassers on sight, Cartman could ground up Scott's parents' bodies overnight, cook them into chili, and feed them to him in front of the entire town. As who would see that coming? But while Scott is focused on the devastating shock and grief of losing his parents, Cartman is too busy licking up his enemy's deliciously salty tears to care. And he did all of this over $16.12. Because to an amoral psychopath like Eric Cartman, there's no such thing as a disproportionate response. You either crossed him or you didn't. You either enabled his desires or made yourself an obstacle in his path. As one way or the other, he will get what he wants. It's just your choice whether you want to be a victim or an accomplice. There is no low he will not stoop to, no line he will not cross. He doesn't think about other people's feelings, he doesn't abide by any moral code, and he never displays anything even resembling remorse unless he gets into trouble. And all of this and more is what makes Eric Theodore Cartman one of the most selfish, manipulative, evil characters ever portrayed on television.
Damn.
Is it impossible to work with millennials or Gen Z nowadays?
No.
Or do boomers all just like to complain about the newest generation to feel cool?
Let your boom and make it boom.
South Park says it is, and they're not wrong at its core. This is what Season 26, Episode 5, Dick and Boss is all about. Matt and Trey have tackled the issues surrounding today's jobs market from many angles, and a lot of their lampooning was spot on. We're going through the episode and answering all the big questions, like, are mental health days a real thing? How bad is the current job market actually? And finally, is the newest generation of workers just entitled and lazy, or do they actually have valid concerns?
Clean shop.
That is Butters, a 10-year-old boy who got a job working at an ice cream shop. Something he can do because of the Great Resignation labor shortage, where businesses are now struggling to find people so they can take whatever they can get, even if that means hiring a kid, with parents' permission, of course.
That is messed up.
According to Cartman. But not because Butters is too young for a job, it's because Butters has a job and Eric does not.
I want a job.
To which Kyle rightfully points out.
You wouldn't last 4 hours on a job, fat ass.
Cartman is probably an employer's worst nightmare, which we'll have to see later. First, he checks Kyle's privilege and points out that it's easy for him to say, as he lives in a nice house and Eric is still living in a hot dog.
It's not fair that some people in our country are given the opportunity for employment while others aren't.
Cartman goes home pointing out to his mom that their house is not a place to raise a child, and he is the man of the house and needs to be the one making money. And there's only one solution.
You have to let me go find a job, Mom.
Eric's mom also agrees with Kyle that he wouldn't last 4 hours at a job, and after being called the Jew by Eric, she caves in and lets him have a job so he can get a healthy reality check. To which he then shows up at Butters' workplace.
Hey, Butters, I'm here for my job.
Much to Butters' surprise. You see, Cartman is not here because he actually wants a job. He just wants money, does not want to work. Just like the Gen Z, according to South Park, and employers across various industries. So what's wrong with hiring Gen Z? A lot. First, let's get to one of the most obvious ones, salary. With the current inflation and cost of living, which have increased to absurd levels in some places, Gen Z wants to be paid a livable wage. Most employers like money, however. They don't like paying more than minimum wage, especially not for a candidate that has unrealistic salary expectations and doesn't have the optimal qualifications for the job, which is also a problem. From an employer's point of view, this type of candidate is more likely to hop on a new opportunity given it pays more than their current job. An employer would prefer employees that will stay there for the long run and are worth investing time and money into. Next to that, companies have changed massively over the years. The school system remains relatively the same, meaning there is a mismatch between skills. Gen Z is also disproportionately equipped with digital skills and not enough with hands-on skills. It's why many practical workers earn more in their field than these highly educated thinkers do, simply because they're capable of doing something with their hands instead of bogus creative work. Then there is diversity and inclusion. Let me tell you, whenever a blue-haired woman walks into a job interview, you know HR is having a heart attack. Employers just want someone that best fits the position. They don't want a greasy, overweight neckbeard sitting at the reception desk to be the first impression of their company. They want a cute, sympathetic hottie with big boobs.
Some of us like it small. That's fine. Understandable. But I like it big.
Even if the greasy neckbeard would have better qualifications, they could pick the cute hottie simply because it's within the best interests of the company. It's not that employers are against diversity or inclusion, but everything that comes with it after that. It's like a ticking time bomb. It starts small with ignoring the dress code because they want to express themselves, and getting Greg fired because he misspelled ginger in the group chat, but quickly turns to striking in the lunchroom because Harry was eating meat, and they insist the workplace should become vegan and gluten-free from now on. Employers don't want to dedicate resources to it, as it's not earning them money. That's why they'd rather avoid these employees. But there's more priorities millennials and Gen Z have. It even gets worse, as we'll see in South Park.
Butters, can you vouch for him? Is he trustworthy and...
After hesitating for a bit, Butters vouches for Eric and Cartman gets his first job. Butters starts training him.
Alright, Eric, so there's 3 types of ice cream. Waffle cone, sugar cone, and cups.
And Eric demonstrates the work ethic of his generation by asking just the right questions.
And when do we get to have breaks?
From this moment onward, it is obvious Eric does not want to work.
Okay, Eric, can you scoop out some coconut almond fudge?
Why?
Now, Eric is not winning any Employee of the Month awards, but the work environment will soon change because of Butters' attitude.
'Cause it's your job, Eric.
Whoa, Butters, let's not make this a toxic work environment, okay?
After being asked to do the very bare minimum, Eric, a true Gen Zer, calls the environment toxic. So what is a toxic work environment? Initially, the term toxic environment was literal, until 1989 when some boomers started complaining using the term as a metaphor. It defined a toxic workplace as those featuring conflict among roles, obscure goals and values, aggressive communication, and scenarios in which staff are used like material resources. It slowly became ubiquitous, but really took off with the #MeToo movement. Now, toxic work environments have probably existed all throughout history. They came in different shapes and sizes, but with all the emancipation going on in the last century, morals changed and so did work environments, leading to new standards. According to a survey, about 88% of the 19 to 34-year-olds have experienced a toxic work environment. 90% of the 35 to 44-year-olds have experienced it, but only 79% of 45-plus-year-olds have experienced it. That's about a 20% difference for people that have worked longer in their lives, only to have experienced it less. Does that prove that Gen Z and millennials are way more easily agitated than boomers? Not necessarily, as a lot of other factors play a role, like how boomers value loyalty more to an employer, meaning they could have experienced less work environments. It could also be that boomers are more tolerant to toxic work environments. Whatever party you ask will just blame it on the other. I personally think there's some truth to both. Apart from that, there is something else that has been made up by Gen Z and millennials that didn't impact boomers back in the day, which we see happening in South Park.
Eric, you can't just sit there at a table.
Eric decided he needs to take a small break from work, and he can, because it's Monday. So why don't young people like to work on Monday? Well...
So haven't you heard of Bare Minimum Mondays? It's a thing that young people have created because we care about our mental health.
Are mental health days really a thing? Well, it is according to the internet. I couldn't find any laws about it. It usually depends on the PTO policies, which are vastly different from one company to another. Now, I'm not saying these mental health days are bad. It's pretty good that young people show that they care about their own personal well-being. As mental health problems have become an increased problem over the last years, it affects about 1 in 5 people worldwide. So chances are you could have experienced something yourself as well. A psychopathology study by the American Psychological Association reveals that over the last few decades, there has been an increase in demand for care. Economic stressors, the global pandemic, and population growth are all considered contributing factors for the increase in mental health disorders. But Eric does not care about any of those studies. He's abusing the system and morals society has implemented to deal with the global mental health pandemic, which reminds me of the time I was working my first job in a small convenience store. We were only allowed a 15-minute break on our 4-hour shifts, which was very strictly enforced. Unless you were smoking. People that went for a cigarette were given a chance to do so outside of the breaks. It was massively unfair to the others who weren't allowed to take breaks merely because they didn't smoke. You can probably guess what started happening after that, as it was a system that got abused pretty easily. Eric loves that. It's another system he can abuse, much like another system that has become the norm at some companies since 2019. Eric continues being a terrible employee and doesn't return to work from his break. At this point, a kid delivers a laptop to Butters. To no one's surprise, it's Eric.
Hey, Butters.
He's working from home, even though he's working at an ice cream shop. Much to the surprise of the manager as well.
Shop.
Not even touching on the subject of Eric laying on the couch with a bag of crisps, well, he's not feeling well. After the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to work from home, and rightfully so. I've always loved working from home, even if it's just 1 or 2 days a week. It allows me to do my laundry, vacuum the living room, run some errands, and maybe go to the gym outside of those busy hours. All while still being paid for sometimes moving my mouse so I appear online to other coworkers. It's even better to start a meeting with just yourself so that you appear to be in a meeting, where no one else will bother you and won't be surprised if you don't reply the whole day. You were in a meeting after all. There is another side to this though. Working from home also incentivizes me to be more productive to prove to my boss that I'm able to work without his direct supervision. There were also less distractions as I wasn't chatting up my coworkers anymore. If I do the same or even more work when working from home and do it even quicker, why would it be a problem? It all boils down to oversight and control over employees' work and when they are not physically present in the office. They just love micromanaging. Does that mean employees working from home are less productive? Not necessarily. There are many studies claiming that they are more productive. There are also studies claiming it's about 10 to 20% less productive. We will never know if companies have paid to manipulate these studies to enforce their own rules, so you can decide for yourself. Besides that, there's also massive amounts of money involved. Companies either own their office buildings or they have a long-term lease which they can't break. If you have a 10-year lease on a building, you still have to pay rent every single month, even if the office is empty. If you break the lease, you still have to pay out of the rest of your contract. So companies are forcing employees back to the office to make sure they still get some value for the money they're spending on rent or building maintenance. Then there are also government subsidies. Companies like Amazon gets tax breaks from state and city governments to build offices in a city. State and city governments expect those offices to be filled with people who are spending their money in the local coffee shops, restaurants, etc. If those people aren't doing that because they're working from home, the tax breaks get withdrawn and companies are forced to pay millions of dollars. So they force employees back to the office to retain their tax breaks and avoid any penalty clauses in their contracts with city governments. Just like Cartman is forced back to work after twisting both mental health days and working from home privileges into a running joke, or, well, Cartman being his usual self is just complaining again.
You know what's total bullcrap, Butters? It's how much money the owner of this place is making while we're out here busting our asses.
Despite Cartman not doing a minute of work and being lazy on his boss's dime, he leaves Butters to do all the work and reaches his breaking point. Cartman decides he wants to become an entrepreneur and wouldn't want to be working for a boss anymore, which is also peak Gen Z behavior, and there's several reasons for it. Many Gen Zers and younger audiences are looking towards entrepreneurial opportunities as a more attractive career path. And I'm not just talking about the OnlyFans models who are in it for the money. This generation values independence and flexibility in their work life, often prioritizing work-life balance and the ability to control their own schedules so they can hop on GTA 6 once it finally releases in 2040. A further motivation for young entrepreneurs is the desire to make a positive impact in their community, or perhaps not even just a positive impact on their community, but to flex on their Instagrams. Think about it. We're surrounded by luxury cars, mansions, and lavish lifestyles on Instagram. It's almost like propaganda that is being pushed in front of everyone's eyes. It's creating a desire to live such a lifestyle with many influencers claiming they make millions being an entrepreneur who are taken as inspiration. The biggest facade is, most are just fake. They're pretending to be rich so you buy their course, which will actually make them rich. Besides that, 72% of Gen Zers believe times have been economically tougher for them than for earlier generations, making them believe they need to be entrepreneurial to earn more to cover basic expenses like housing, groceries, and Fortnite game passes. There are claims that Gen Z is actually the first generation in about 70 years to be worse off than the previous one, but then again it's highly politicized and sufficiently subjective that it's really easy to make the data fit nearly any argument you want to make. Let me know what you guys think by sharing your thoughts in the comments below. With his newfound entrepreneurial drive, Eric turns to one of his most trusted friends to start a business together.
Kenny, you're not gonna believe this, but I just quit my job. You heard it, gang?
He explains to Kenny he got fed up with working his fingers to the bone for some lazy piece of bleep owner and came to the genius idea of opening a restaurant with Kenny. And he's found just the location. That, of course, is Butters. It takes a little bit of convincing, but after a little while, Butters is on board as an investor.
And I know exactly what we should name it.
Now we all know where this is going.
And the new name has just been announced. Dick and Balls Hot Dogs.
To be fair, this would probably be a hit on TikTok and Instagram as well, if someone opened a hot dog stand with that name. It's a hit with Kenny and Eric as well.
He said it! We got him to say Dick and Balls!
And it doesn't just stop there. Eric is a marketing genius, and his hot dogs have a nice signature smiley face below them, accompanied by a fitting slogan.
Let Dick and Balls put a smile on your buns.
What?
Now, like a true investor, Butters comes in angry about the name, noticing Cartman and Kenny are just playing around and spending his investor money on some expensive dinners and shirts that say business owner. Much like those influencers I talked about earlier who would rather talk about being a business owner than actually doing any work. But unlike those course sellers, Dick and Balls actually has some potential to it. The unnecessary renovations start happening around Cartman's house, and everything seems to be going according to plan. Meanwhile, Butters goes home and gets scolded by his parents for not having any money in his bank account anymore. There could only be one reason for this, according to his dad. Feeling betrayed, Butters calls Cartman to see what's up. Eric is, of course, enjoying the whole new playground his house has become, still not moving a finger. Initially, Cartman believes reopening the Dick and Boss restaurant is going to be an easy task. He feels confident that his entrepreneurial spirit will lead to success, even promising Butters that everything will work out. Butters, skeptical and fed up, challenges Cartman to just get it over with, pushing him to open the business and see what happens. Cartman agrees and will start hiring, starting tomorrow. Only to find out he's about to get a taste of his own medicine.
What the hell is going on? Why is nobody showing up?
The lack of candidates leads Cartman to confront a teenager passing by, asking if he wants to work for minimum wage, which he doesn't. Cue the boomer rant.
That's because your generation is lazy! You got all comfy during the pandemic, nobody knows how to work anymore!
So is the newest generation actually that lazy and entitled? Millennials and Gen Z can be very lazy, and lots of them are the employees who slack off or make TikToks in the bathroom during their breaks. But it's definitely not all of them. As we see with the current rise of the hustle culture where relentless work and productivity is glorified. We all like to bash on generations that aren't our own. Millennials laugh at boomers for their leather phone cases that double as wallets. Boomers say millennials are whiny wokey-cokies who spend all their money on avocado toast so now they can't buy houses. And of course, millennials and boomers accuse Gen Z of being entitled and lazy. The thing about generational stereotyping is that it comes from somewhere. And often, parts of it are true. Millennials, for example, can't afford to buy houses and do indeed like avocado toast. But are those things related? It's true that Gen Z talk more about boundaries and stick to those boundaries harder than the generation before them. And it's true that Gen Z doesn't want to do certain types of work. Gen Z is just a product of a society that's evolved far quicker than any point in history. That means things that motivate them are very different from what motivated previous generations. Boomers and Gen Xers often emphasize loyalty and long hours, while millennials and Gen Zers are likely to challenge the status quo, seeking flexibility and purpose in their careers. Thus, Gen Z is lazy and boomers are old-fashioned. Luckily, boomers are also keen to adapt in the case of South Park. As Cartman keeps hiring, Daryl shows up. Eric offers Daryl the position he's looking for. Daryl immediately asks if he can work from home and that he will need mental health days, sparking outrage by Eric.
Where do people get this stuff? Alright, fine, never mind, we don't want to hire you.
Now that Eric is on the opposite side, he's suddenly quick to change his opinion. He would make a great politician. I mean, he tries to get another set of employees, but the same thing keeps happening, leading to his eventual downfall.
It's impossible to open any kind of business these days when this generation doesn't know how to work.
Meanwhile, poor Butters finds himself working to the bone to make the money that Cartman claims he needs. When he finds out Cartman took all of his money and used it to turn the hot dog stand into the dream home he wants, he goes ballistic.
Dang it!
Using all the skills he's learned, Butters single-handedly runs Dick and Boss and does an excellent job doing so. Before long, enough customers arrive for him to make back all the money Cartman blew and then some. Turns out, much like with all the problems of today's society, all you need is an individual that actually does something.
They can destroy everything you love, Stan.
Who are they? It's the corporations. As we all know, corporations love us very much. And if you're one of those cynics who don't believe that, I have a heartwarming story for you.
I like stories.
There is a light bulb at this fire station in Livermore, California. That light bulb has been on for 123 years straight without burning out. This light bulb, your bank account, and Randy Marsh are all connected in a twisted web of money and manipulation that goes back further than you can even begin to imagine. South Park exposed a small part of the web in one of the more cheekier episodes in recent years, Japanese toilets. Yeah, I know, I started talking about light bulbs and now I'm talking about toilets. Why? Well, because the more I looked into it, the more I realized that it's all connected. There is one reason, and one reason only, as to why that light bulb has been on for so long, while all others have burned out 1,000,000 times over. It's the same reason why your bank account is nearly empty. And it's also the same reason why you use toilet paper and buy new stuff every 3 days. If we follow the story, you'll see that reason for yourself. You'll see how it ruins your life, how it ruins your health, and how it keeps you poor, and how it holds humanity back. That is the plot of Japanese toilets. The episode starts with a seemingly petty disagreement between Randy and his wife. The powder room toilet is broken, again. Sharon wants to get a new toilet, but Randy doesn't want to.
We can't just get rid of old Blue, Sharon.
So Sharon threatens that she will stop helping him with his business, and like a good married man, Randy caves for the 1,000,000th time.
Right, all right, Sharon, you win. As usual.
It's the golden rule of marriage. You can be right or you can be happy. Choose wisely. But that is not the only lesson in this episode. Not even close. This episode is about something way more important than heroically losing arguments to your wife. It's about butts.
Poor old Blue.
After mourning his poor toilet, Randy goes shopping for another one. He wants a toilet that is as nice as possible.
How much you looking to spend? Well, I'm not poor.
Randy here is in that classic sweet spot that corporations really love. A guy who just made some money and it's burning a hole in his pocket. He's looking for a way to prove that he finally has made it. Naturally, corporations are always eager to help. At a price, of course. The salesman mentions that there is a higher class of toilet, Japanese toilets. But he says Randy probably doesn't want to spend that kind of money, which annoys Randy.
I'm not poor.
This is a clever commentary on how luxury brands sometimes use reverse psychology to trick us into buying their stuff. While luxury brands yap a lot about quality and innovation and all that stuff, what they really sell is exclusivity. We naturally value what is rare, and we also want what we can't have. It's the forbidden fruit effect. The toilet salesman understands that and plays Randy like a fiddle. Clueless, Randy falls right into the trap. He insists on seeing the Japanese toilets just to prove that he's not poor. But once again, that's not the point of this episode. This episode is about butts and how they run the world. So let's get to them. Randy gets introduced to the Japanese toilets. They open automatically when you walk into a room, they play music for you, and they even have seat warmers. They just have one design flaw.
With a Japanese toilet, you don't need toilet paper.
Now, the design flaw doesn't look like a design flaw at all.
It has warm water and a dryer and cleans you 8 times better than toilet paper can.
That is going to be a big problem.
You're mad.
But in the meantime, Randy takes the Japanese toilet for a test drive. Randy is sold.
Okay, how much?
He buys it and then tries to justify the purchase to his family.
We're basically the Kennedys of South Park.
Keep that at the back of your mind. We all know how the Kennedys are famous for their good luck, don't we? Randy keeps up the lecture.
Well-off families have nice things, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that.
When the toilet gets delivered, Sharon gets suspicious. This toilet delivery features more pomp and ceremony than a North Korean military parade. Sharon can see that this toilet is going to be a problem. She asks Randy how much it costs.
Oh, Sharon, 10-ish.
What's 10-ish?
10-ish, 1,000-ish, 10,000-ish.
Sharon wants to return the toilet, but Randy asks her to use it first.
Try it, Sharon.
Sharon has the same spiritual experience that Randy had at the store. But this toilet is going to cause a lot of problems, and they start almost immediately.
Oh, look, there he goes. It's Mr. Big Shot.
Stan gets bullied at school. All of a sudden, the other kids hate him. He gets snide comments shouted at him everywhere he goes.
How about caring for something that matters?
Even Jimmy tells Stan to be careful. But why is Stan getting treated like this?
Your dad called everyone last night and told them you have a $10,000 toilet.
So that's it? Basic envy? It appears like it, but appearances can be deceiving. Naturally, Randy is completely oblivious to the mounting resentment. He invites all his old friends over for brunch and keeps asking if any of them need to use the bathroom.
Does anyone need to go to the bathroom?
When nobody bites, Randy keeps feeding them and keeps asking if anybody needs to use the bathroom break until somebody does.
I think I could use the restroom.
And it's at this moment, it's Randy's time to shine.
I feel bad that most people have to walk around with fecal matter on their anus, but I'm just lucky.
Yep, Randy is more insufferable about his toilet than a vegan Tesla owner who just bought Bitcoin. Kyle's mom comments on how expensive those toilets are, but Randy was prepared for this. It's the only reason he invited all these people to his house in the first place.
But for those of us who can afford it, it's well worth it.
Randy is experiencing that high that often comes with a luxury purchase. He feels that he is part of a special club. Research shows that most people get a boost in their sense of self-worth after splurging on luxuries. This self-esteem boost can sometimes turn into a superiority complex, which annoys people. This is what we see with Stan's friends at school. Stan gets mad at his dad because all the bragging is getting him unwanted hate. Randy says he's just trying to help people.
And I'm just like the well-respected guy who's trying to open people's eyes like JFK.
Annoying as it is, Randy showing off and comparing himself to JFK is not the real problem. It rubs his friends and his son's friends the wrong way, but those are not the people he should be worried about. He should worry about people like his proctologist. According to Google, that's a butt doctor. Please pray that you never need one. Randy's proctologist makes a house call because Randy hasn't been to the doctor's office for a while. It's because he doesn't need to. After ditching toilet paper, Randy's hemorrhoids have cleared right up.
In fact, I don't think I'll be needing your services anymore since I've gotten a Japanese toilet.
Randy proudly shows the proctologist the Japanese toilet. So far, everyone has been impressed by it. But there's always that one guy.
Whoa, hey! You gotta ruin Tuscany! I hate you!
Why would a doctor hate a toilet that much? Well, the proctologist can't afford to take his wife to Tuscany anymore because people with clean butts don't get hemorrhoids, and they don't need a proctologist.
I never realized you made so much money off my...
Randy decides to share this fresh realization with the whole town. Now, obviously, most people can't afford a $10,000 toilet, but Randy has a solution.
There are actually Japanese toilets made for commoners.
There are bidet attachments for regular toilets that are even cheaper. Randy tells the commoners of South Park as much.
They may not be Nihon no Stairu, but they are good enough for you guys.
Despite his annoying superiority complex, Randy's just trying to help. He explains that between the cost of toilet paper, doctors, and hemorrhoid cream, a Japanese toilet pays for itself in just a few years.
Even commoners don't need toilet paper anymore.
But in the middle of his speech, Randy gets a taste of that famous Kennedy luck. He gets shot.
Oh.
Who shot him, and why? For answers, we have to go to Jimmy Velmer.
Have you ever asked yourself why we use toilet paper?
No, Jimmy. Why? Jimmy doesn't answer the why. But he drops quite a heavy monologue that many downsides of toilet paper. For starters, it's just not very effective as a cleaning agent. There's always a little bit of poop smeared around the exit. Jimmy points out that 70% of the world uses good old soap and water instead of toilet paper. Then he rips into a massive amount of toilet paper Americans use.
The average American uses 140 rolls of toilet paper per year.
Pundits have nitpicked and fact-checked this line to discredit the episode, but Matt and Trey aren't trying to deceive us over here. They're victims of overblown data published by the NRDC, which is a source of this 140 rolls per year figure.
Are they dating? Oh.
The 140 rolls per person per year is crazy. That's almost 3 rolls of toilet paper per week. You have to be a special kind of toilet destroyer to use that much TP. Less biased surveys have put toilet paper usage in America to 56 to 85 rolls per person per year. That's about 1 roll per week, which is more reasonable from my own experience. But it's still a crazy high number. In a country of 300 million people, you have to cut down a horrendous number of trees to make enough toilet paper for them. Jimmy has the figures.
To supply the United States with toilet paper, it takes 31.1 million trees per year.
That number doesn't really make sense, so here's how to visualize it in a more American manner. If you assume those 31 million trees were planted 10 feet apart, then we're talking of a forest land the size of 60,000 football fields being cleared every year just so people can smear poop all over their butt cheeks. Stan asks the obvious question.
So then why do Americans use it so much?
Jimmy tells him none of it makes any sense. When Stan tries to pursue the issue further, Jimmy shuts him down. Americans don't want to change their toilets, and they never will.
Just tell your dad to stop.
But Randy has already been stopped by a bullet. And as Stan tries to get to the bottom of the assassination attempt on his father, the proctologist takes 6 Japanese delivery men hostage.
I ain't going down for this! I didn't shoot Randy Marsh!
Nobody has accused him of anything, but the proctologist is convinced that somebody will frame him for shooting Randy.
No, but they're gonna use me as their scapegoat!
Who are they? The bot doctor shoots himself in the butt before he can disclose that. But in his rant, he gives Stan something to nibble on.
When that second-grade kid wrote a story in the school paper about toilets 2 years ago!
Stan goes looking for the second-grade kid.
You know more about this.
Jimmy hops away as fast as his crutches can carry him. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't get very far. Stan catches up with him and insists that Jimmy tells him what he knows.
They took everything from me, Stan! My bike, my cat.
And Stan finally figures it out. It was the toilet paper companies. They have the most to lose. A bidet is a one-off purchase. Toilet paper is a subscription. And unlike paying for toilet paper subscriptions, subscribing to my YouTube channel is free. For toilet paper, you have to buy at least 1 roll every week. Even though it's relatively cheap, the costs add up pretty fast. American households spend an average of $182 a year on toilet paper. That cash by itself is more than enough to buy a bidet attachment and leave some change for a couple of Big Macs. Or you could just buy a purpose-designed bidet toilet. Even the super high-end one max out at around $2,000, which is way less than the $11,000 you would spend on toilet paper over your lifetime. And that's without getting into the superior hygiene and complete elimination of hemorrhoid risks. These are the numbers that scared big toilet paper into shooting Randy, in the South Park universe at least. There is no evidence that they're shooting people in our world, and I really hope they're not. And they don't actually need to, because big toilet paper has access to the strongest magic spell that has ever been invented. If you can guess what it is, I'll give you a cookie. Lock down your answers in the comments. Here's how the magic spell goes. If you don't want a man to use something, just call it gay. It's the most powerful magic spell in the world. Straight men will do anything to prove that they're not gay. I get a mid-haircut on purpose and avoid any clothes that are too fashionable because I don't want to look like I care too much about my appearance. That is gay. It's the same with food. I will never eat a banana in public, or use a straw, or put anything remote.
I have no problem eating a banana or drinking from a straw. I don't know about eating the glizzy though. Hot dogs have been ruined.
Phallic shaped in my mouth, and I will manspread until I die, because every time I think of crossing my legs, a sound will play in my head.
Why are you gay?
There are countless examples. We never hug our friends or our dads.
No.
The closest we get to show any physical affection is that weird thing you do when you shake hands, pull each other close, and bump shoulders. I can't even tell my girlfriend I love her when I'm around my friends because they'll laugh at me. So every time she says, "Love you," I have to respond with, "Okay," and then hang up before she can ask why I didn't say it back. Bidets have received the same treatment. Shooting stuff up your butthole? Yeah, that feels pretty gay. I saw a meme recently that says a man shouldn't even shave that area because he who cleans his house expects visitors. I don't disagree with that logic. This is a magic spell that the toilet paper industry has used to stay in business. They just hacked our psychology to sell us an inferior product. Randy getting shot is an analogy for this. Jimmy summarizes this when he gives Stan a chilling warning.
Don't squeeze the shark.
Stan doesn't listen. He tries to preach the message his father started.
My father wanted everyone to see that there were alternatives.
The crowd roars in agreement.
He who cleans his house expects visitors. Yo!
And Stan rallies against toilet paper.
Oh my God.
Randy, however, jumps out of his hospital bed and stops Stan from saying anything.
Yeah, so we have nothing against toilet paper. It's a great product, and it was childish of me to make fun of it.
Stan is surprised by this.
Dad, we can't just back down and—
Bro, I got shot!
Randy has been scared straight. He even gets the whole town to apologize to the toilet paper companies for all the bad things he said about them.
South Park, everyone say you're sorry.
We're sorry.
Okay, great. Come on, guys, let's go home.
The Marshes return home defeated. Randy gets rid of his Japanese toilet and digs up Old Blue. The episode wraps up here. This is not South Park giving up on the quest for cleaner butts, but rather a commentary on the chokehold corporations have on us. They have weaponized our psychology and used plenty of other tricks to make us part with our money. So even though I've known about bidets for most of my life, I've still stuck with toilet paper because twisted bro logic says it's a manlier option. That's the propaganda corporations use to sell us inferior products. They use our own laziness and prejudices against us. And it's not just limited to toilet paper. We're probably getting scammed on every single thing we buy. Alright, you remember the light bulb from our introduction part? It's been working for 123 years, but I grew up in a house where our light bulbs burned out every 2 or 3 months. We switched to energy-saving bulbs when I was around 10, mostly because of a government policy mandating energy efficiency. But energy-saving LED bulbs can last up to 7 years, so they are an improvement on incandescent bulbs. I used to think that the short lifespan of those bulbs was the limitation of technology, but it turns out I'm wrong. The technology to make bulbs that can last forever existed 100 years ago, but there was just one problem. Building a light bulb that lasts 100 years comes with an obvious problem. There's no return business. Once the customer buys your bulb, they never have to buy one again. So General Electric, Philips, and the other light bulb manufacturers got together and conspired to deliberately make inferior light bulbs. The math isn't complicated. If they can sell you a light bulb that dies after 2 months, then they can sell you a light bulb over and over again for the rest of your life. It's an infinite money glitch. The fancier term is planned obsolescence. This scam is probably as old as humanity itself, but the light bulb conspiracy is the first planned obsolescence campaign that affected pretty much everybody in the world. General Motors copied these tactics and started changing its car designs every year to motivate people to buy new ones, even though the old ones worked perfectly okay. They didn't improve the cars themselves, they just repainted them in different colors and built them in slightly different shapes. That's why cars started looking old after 5 years. They just keep changing the designs until you feel the social pressure to buy a new car because your old one started to look a little dated. They also build them to be a little fragile, so they would conveniently break down just when they need you to buy a new car. Now, every industry has planned obsolescence. The Germans figured out how to make unbreakable glass 50 years ago, but you don't see them in stores because that's not good for business. They have to sell you a breakable glass just so you can go buy a new one after you drop it, and then it shatters. Fashion companies do the same thing by releasing new designs every 2 weeks or so. Once they run out of designs, they start recycling old designs from the 70s and 80s. Instead of buying clothes that can last for years, we now have people who only wear an outfit once before throwing it away. And it's not like you can wear these things that much anymore. Most of the crap the likes of Temu sells is designed to fall apart the moment you wear it. Fast fashion has become a scam. In the US, 20% of clothes are never worn in the first place. They just fill up closet space until they're eventually thrown away. We're basically taking money and throwing it into a landfill. This is without going into all of that human suffering that is powering the supply chain. China uses forced labor to grow cotton that is then turned into clothes by underpaid workers, including children. Then we spend a tremendous amount of fuel and manpower shipping all of these clothes across the world only to throw them away. Up to 40% of clothes are never sold. Of the ones that get sold, 60 to 80% are thrown away within the first year.
Really?
All those poor Uyghurs and the little kids are suffering for nothing. On top of the human suffering, there is an environmental cost of throwing away 60 billion items of clothing per year. Just imagine how much trash that is. Well, you don't have to imagine. We dump 92 million tons of clothes every year. To make that number easier to visualize, that is a full truckload of discarded clothing that we're dumping every single second. By the time you finish watching this video, we have dumped over 1,000 truckloads of clothes. And donating doesn't help much either. Donated clothes mostly get dumped in third world countries. Donation just transfers the problem to somebody else. But fashion brands will never tell you all of this in their ads. They will never tell you that their crap is filling the oceans with microplastics, which then make their way into our bodies. Every industry is now like this. They all want to sell you stuff that is purposely designed to break down or become unfashionable after 3 days, so you can go back and buy more. A lot of companies start out with good intentions. They make an excellent product like the iPod or the iPhone. But once they've sold it to everybody, they don't go and build a different product. They just re-release the same product with slight changes over and over again. Apple is the biggest abuser of these tactics, but all of them do it. Add a camera, remove a headphone jack to make people buy overpriced AirPods, then recycle a design from 2010 and call it an earth-shattering innovation. Apple tells people to think different in its ads, which is really funny because they're buying the exact same phone that everyone else has is the exact opposite of thinking different. This fake innovation is the biggest trick in the corporate bag of tricks. Corporations turn you into a conformist, but trick you into thinking that you're a rebel. Apple still pretends to be a part of the upstart computer company, taking on the establishment like it was in the 1980s. This is just not true anymore. Apple is literally the biggest corporation in the world. It's not an underdog anymore. And then there are all the subscriptions. It's becoming increasingly impossible to own anything anymore. Everything now requires a subscription. BMW even tried selling a subscription for heated seats in a car that you already own. These tricks are holding us back. Instead of investing in innovation that moves us forward, companies invest more in finding ways to sell us the same old stuff for more money. Imagine how advanced we would be if Apple saved all the money it wastes on pretending to design a new iPhone and instead invested it in developing new technologies. But this is all a fantasy. Corporations are not run by aliens, they're run by people. It seems we're all lazy. If we find a way to make money without really doing anything, most of us would probably take it. So, the corpos are never going to change on their own. The best we can do is stop rewarding companies that play these tricks on us, but it can be difficult. Just like South Park shows, the marketing and propaganda machine is almost unbeatable. We have millions of psychopaths who spend all their time learning psychological tricks they can use to sell you garbage. These
it's called AI.
Psychopaths are called marketers. But we can still try. Start buying stuff that is built to last. Resist trends once in a while. Maybe even try out a bidet. And by God, no matter what happens, please do not buy the iPhone 16.
South Park has done their fair share of multi-part stories over the years, obviously dropping many two-part episodes, but despite their success with three-parters, they've only done a small handful of trilogies. And while stories like Imagination Land or their massive superhero saga seem to get a ton of attention from the fanbase, I don't see nearly as many people hyping up Season 17's Black Friday trilogy. A pseudo-prequel to their hit video game Stick of Truth, the Black Friday trilogy actually has a lot going for it, poking fun at Game of Thrones, satirizing the consumer culture around Black Friday, and wrapping it in a fun Xbox vs PlayStation console wars package. You could honestly argue there's too much happening in this three-parter, but I think that it's pretty undeniable that they stuck the landing. So join me as I deep dive into South Park's Black Friday trilogy just in time for Black Friday. Wait, what did you say? They're gonna do what?
In an effort to make sure everyone is prepared, the mall has decided to push Black Friday by 1 week.
Okay, so just in time for the beginning of December, I guess. Let's get into it. So, as I mentioned in the intro, South Park's Black Friday trilogy was primarily made up of three major story factors. It's clearly meant to parody and make fun of Game of Thrones, which had just aired its third season in the summer of the same year. They've turned the idea of console wars into an actual war using the aforementioned Game of Thrones parody, and of course the social commentary surrounding Black Friday and consumer culture. But interestingly, the initial jumping off point also included another major factor. With Season 17 leading up to the release of their massive RPG South Park The Stick of Truth, Stone and Parker talked about how many of the ideas for the game fell to the wayside.
Originally it started as a thing of there was just so many things that we wanted in the video game that ended up having to get lifted out of the game that were like, God, this is all such funny, cool stuff.
This is why so many of the kids are wearing the same outfits and gear that they wore in Stick of Truth. Cartman, Kenny, Stan, Butters, Jimmy, all wearing the exact same stuff from the RPG. Though obviously Cartman's wizard outfit was actually first utilized in Season 6's The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers, and I expect that they changed Kyle's gear and outfit from Stick of Truth, because in that game he's portrayed as a king, whereas he's not the leader in this story.
We actually ended up using really nothing that was thrown out from the video game because this just became its own totally its own idea.
I think there are more places where some of the ideas from the games were going to be baked into the story as well, but were pulled out at the very last minute in some cases, but we'll go over those as we get there in the story. Also, similarly to some of their other trilogies, they didn't start it with the intention of it being a trilogy. Often these kinds of bigger stories just sort of expand as they write, and while this one landed at 3 episodes, they even briefly thought about going bigger.
We didn't know, are we going to do this 2 parts? Are we going to do 3? Are we going to do 4? We even talked about just doing the whole rest of the season with this idea. We probably could have, because it just branched off into so many different things.
And with how much the story is juggling, I sort of agree with them here. What we ended up with is super satisfying, but they probably could have used 1 more episode, bringing them to the end of season 17. But I also think these episodes don't get enough credit for how ingeniously all of these ideas do mesh together. At a glance, it all feels really disparate, but when you really dissect the different story elements, it actually works so well. Matt and Trey have these great fantasy character models from Stick of Truth, so perfect. Let's use those for a big epic fantasy making fun of Game of Thrones. That tracks. But how does that tie into Black Friday?
It was really once we had the idea of like, oh, let's center this all around Black Friday, because that's this sort of epic thing that the whole town can be dealing with. That's when we knew we kind of had a big idea.
Yeah, Black Friday sounds like something out of Game of Thrones. I mean, it sounds like some foreboding thing.
So in Black Friday, Matt and Trey have found their red wedding, but then comes the all-important question for the best of South Park's stories. What is at stake for the kids? What child-centric motivation is brought to the table that starts simply, but ends up pulling the boys deeper and deeper into something big and ridiculous? And the answer is, of course, video games. This episode came out right before the PS4 and Xbox Ones were set to launch at retailers, and so Matt and Trey dusted off the age-old console wars and turned it into the actual war in which their Black Friday Game of Thrones event took place. And this was also able to ingeniously tie into their social commentary regarding Black Friday, namely that it is incredibly sad and embarrassing how aggressive and violent people will get to save a few bucks on a flat screen TV. It really is all just so well tied together. Each and every aspect of the story has a natural Venn diagram crossover with another part of the story. So while yes, these episodes are doing a lot with this story, I truly think the aspects they chose to tie together are done so ingeniously. But let's get into the episodes themselves.
They are calling it Black Friday. Woo, spooky.
This trilogy starts with a lineup of mall security guards, including Randy, and lays out the exact issue that would cause the incoming conflict.
The mall is offering 80% off to the first 30 people in the store.
So right off the bat, they're laying in their criticisms towards the way these Black Friday events take advantage of your average consumer at the expense of their well-being, and lays in the obvious Game of Thrones influence.
Winter is coming.
I really don't think this trilogy gets quite enough credit for how epic and grand they make it feel. Even just this little camera move and the big fantasy music set to Cartman walking to Kenny's house goes such a long way to make it feel like a big event. The score in particular really sells the scale. But as I mentioned earlier, as is the case in so many of my favorite South Park episodes, the stakes are smaller and kid-centric, and so Cartman gathers everyone together to lay out his plan.
We have fought many great battles together. At Cloud's house, at Scott Malkinson's house.
This is such a small line, but it's honestly one of my favorites in the entire trilogy. A, it's incredibly funny, but B, it so perfectly represents that kid point of view. How the games they play feel so much bigger to them than just games, to the point where he's reminiscing about the battle at Scott Malkinson's house. These are the kinds of little details that showcase that kid perspective that makes these stories so much fun for me. This is also one of the things that Stick of Truth does perfectly. And fittingly, Cartman's entire gathering is just about the boys getting next-gen video game consoles. He's caught wind of the Black Friday deal, and his plan is for everyone to work together so they can all get that deal.
We can be the first people inside on Black Friday, and use the 80% to get the gaming systems we need to survive.
But the Game of Thrones influence takes more hold here, as well as the implementation of their version of the console wars. During the big meeting, Cartman pointedly says next-gen gaming consoles, without specifying which one, but later specifies Xbox One. So when the fighters of Zoran realize they aren't on the same side of the console wars, the infighting begins.
I thought we were getting PlayStation 4s. What?
Obviously, console wars are nearly as old as video game consoles themselves. SNES versus Genesis, N64 versus PlayStation, PS2 versus GameCube versus Xbox, the cycle renews each generation. I can't express how much I love the fact that they decided to portray this gen's console wars in this melodramatic, soap operatic, Game of Thrones influenced story. The way the boys argue so emotionally over video game features is such a funny way to portray the ongoing fandom war. And of course, South Park is always good at throwing in personal stakes, pitting old friends against each other.
Stan, the PS4 doesn't have the seamless transition between games, movies, and TV offered by Xbox One. The PS4 controller has a touchpad interface.
Obviously, the personal stakes make this more emotional, but the way the characters make statements about each other's fandoms like this is such an accurate representation of how these silly console wars have been argued on gaming forums for years.
Come on, Cap. Let these Sony wallow in their limited voice control functionality.
In addition to the Game of Thrones influence on the story here, they also start to layer in some of their own criticisms of Game of Thrones as a show. And honestly, this was early Game of Thrones, after season 3, so as fans, Matt and Trey were getting pretty fed up even before most of the rest of the fandom turned on the show in its final seasons.
And then getting to season 3 and going, okay, well the dragons are still coming and the zombies are still coming.
So in this initial episode, they mostly echo their frustrations with the show through Butters, who is watching it for the first time.
I'm still waiting for the darn dragons to show up and kick everyone's butts. but all I get is wiener, wiener, wiener.
Honestly, the first episode really does throw a lot of balls in the air, and there was no guarantee that they would manage to juggle them all. It had a lot of ideas. Randy's whole subplot is that he's got his own ulterior motives for joining the mall security guards, which Sharon clocks immediately.
You're doing this to try and get to the front of the line on Black Friday, aren't you?
The Black Friday situation gets worse when they introduce a new Elmo doll.
Stop touching me, Elmo.
This is actually a reference to the real-life allegations against Elmo's puppeteer, Kevin Clash. Cartman and Stan each desperately try to recruit more people to their sides, with Cartman having far more success. That is until Sony actually gets involved.
The Black Friday Bandudu, which will include 4 controllers, a map of Japan, a $100 rebate.
So yeah, as you can see, this first episode just does so much. It throws countless ideas, references, pieces of commentary, and storylines all into the air with the intention that over the next episode or two, they'll be able to juggle them all. It's a lot of great setup with no real promise that they'll be able to stick the landing. And it even ends on one of my favorite cliffhangers in South Park history, the reveal that shifts the power dynamics significantly.
All hail the princess!
So Kenny has switched sides, the tides of war have turned, but the second episode of the trilogy, A Song of Ass and Fire, evolved a ton over the course of its production week. So before we get into what it became, please allow me this fun but relevant tangent about what the episode almost was, and it's all about Stick of Truth cut content.
And it was really going to be this episode that was just about going around and getting factions to join. And so it was like Kenny went and recruited the Underpants Gnomes, so Cartman went and recruited Crab People, and it didn't feel super Game of Thrones because that's not what it is.
So this is definitely some of the stuff they mentioned earlier in the commentary that was initially them trying to implement cut storylines from Stick of Truth into the show. Thanks to some early builds of Stick of Truth, as well as some concept art, we know for a fact that there were going to be entire quests involving a Crab People / Underpants Gnome feud. Obviously, Underpants Gnomes still appeared in Stick of Truth, as well as a single crab person, but there was meant to be an entire underground section of the game where you not only visit the Crab People city, but the Underpants Gnomes mines also. You can see the concept art for this shared underground area here. And if you even look at the first E3 trailer for Stick of Truth, we see Crab People in the giant battle, as well as an individual fight between your character and Crab People here. And there's lots of videos available online attempting to showcase as much of the cut content as possible. Shout out to the channel Roaming Berry for these. Highly recommend checking that channel out. So this definitely tracks as some of these cut stories from Stick of Truth that Matt and Trey mentioned earlier. The pair even confirmed that this stuff nearly made it into the show.
We still had, actually on Tuesday, we still had Kenny going and recruiting Underpants Gnomes, and it just wasn't feeling right.
There's actually a deleted scene of this on the Season 17 Blu-ray. The boys bring the gnomes some underpants to earn their favor and gain their support.
Then you will fight with us on Black Friday? Who wants to go to the mall on Black Friday and try to get PlayStations?
I think ultimately they made the right decision to abandon the Underpants Gnomes and Crab People angle for this trilogy. As much as I love when they loop in the show's lore and history into bigger stories, it doesn't quite mesh with the story they told here.
Sometimes getting factions and building your armies is just watching people go shopping. Yeah. By adding to their army, isn't that fun?
It also really does feel like something that would have been better in the video game. I adore Stick of Truth, but I would pay an ungodly amount of money to see their original vision for it brought to life. There's a ridiculous amount of cut content. Honestly, I should probably make a dedicated video about it at some point. There's actually one other deleted scene as well, which suggests that they abandoned another potential direction for this story, where Kyle maybe jumped ship and joined Stan and Kenny. It's just a funny, quick little scene where Stan and co are showing Kyle how great the PS4 is at a game store.
Whoa, it vibrated on both sides. Yeah, dude, that's DualShock. Is that a speaker on the controller? Yep. Dude, that's pretty cool.
With the nature of South Park's production schedule, it's always interesting to see how these different things could have turned out had they gone with one idea over another. But what they did end up going with really makes this entire trilogy so cohesive. They lean really far into Microsoft and Sony getting heavily involved in the console wars themselves, which firstly lends to the bigger scale of the Game of Thrones aspect of the story, especially seeing Bill Gates fully take out Steve Ballmer. But it also perfectly aligns with the episode's commentary on Black Friday consumerism and how these corporations take advantage of everyday folks by pitting them against each other to gain leverage in news media.
I used to go out to Black Friday all the time. The only reason why I don't go out to Black Friday no more is because they don't let the white people riot, which was my favorite part of the festivities of Black Friday. I've never been in any Black Friday brawls. I would just go and watch. One year I filmed. I think I might have put it up on one of my vlog channels. But yeah, freaking hilarious stuff. Black Friday these days is pretty much just shopping online.
so we've come to offer swords and battle axes, whatever the kids can carry to help them fight their way through the other shoppers.
But personally, my favorite angle they took with this second episode is the personal angle. The most important aspects of these stories are always the characters and their emotions, and that big ending reveal from the first episode was exactly the circumstance they needed to explore.
We had to get into the emotion of Cartman being super pissed off at Kenny and being betrayed.
I like that the issue here primarily stems from Cartman's own ego, preventing his friend from playing the game the way he wants to. Cartman says he's fine with Kenny being a girl in the game, but the fact that he's a wizard king means he will not let Kenny be a royal princess.
That goddamn traitor. You know why Kenny's doing this, right? Because he wanted to be a princess and I wouldn't let him.
Honestly, one of my favorite moments in this trilogy is right here, when Cartman sees the photo of him and Kenny at Casa Bonita and slams it face down on his table. Genuinely one of Cartman's most human moments in the entire show. Though one of the funniest through lines across all of these episodes is absolutely the Betrayal Garden. Cartman basically brings various allies there and gives them the same spiel over and over, that nobody else matters as long as they get their Xboxes.
The rest are simply there to help us get through those doors.
Don't believe it! He said that to a bunch of people!
Okay, maybe this dude who's pissed that Cartman keeps using his garden is the actual funniest part. This is just such a great runner, particularly when the script gets flipped on Cartman with Bill Gates, who takes the power position over Eric.
The rest are simply there to help us get through those doors.
What?
Ha ha! Now who's walking who through the Betrayal Garden?
This episode might be the funniest of the three. They even loop in George R.R. Martin, who promises Butters and Scott Malkinson that he has ordered pizzas, but instead just keeps describing Game of Thrones wieners.
Okay, fine. What kind of pizzas do you want?
What kind do we want? He hasn't even ordered your pizzas yet!
This is obviously a gag playing on Matt and Trey's frustrations that the dragons and zombies were definitely coming in Game of Thrones, but they hadn't yet, at the time at least. The second episode of this trilogy actually aired the week before Black Friday, which we know is the same week as Thanksgiving, which I think makes this big ending beat even funnier, where they push back Black Friday an entire week.
The genius idea was proposed by George R.R. Martin.
This was forecasting that Matt and Trey would not be producing an episode the week of Thanksgiving, which is always the case in the fall for them, and that the big Black Friday finale would actually be taking place after Black Friday. Interestingly, right at the end of this episode, Matt and Trey actually decided to pull something directly from Stick of Truth and put it in the show, and Stick of Truth hadn't even come out at this point.
Wow, Kenny's a Japanese princess.
This whole Princess Kenny anime intro sequence is right from the final battle of Stick of Truth, but Matt and Trey decided to lean into it a good 4 months before the game released and use it as a major plot point for these final 2 episodes. I do think it's a little strange since this is part of the final sequence of Stick of Truth that they decided to spoil it this far ahead, but it does fit really well, it is really funny, and they also admit that they almost moved a whole different direction with Princess Kenny at the end of this episode.
Luckily, we almost ended this show with him turning into the Japanese prison and then going and having these like superpowers and being able to like blow armies away and all that stuff. And it wasn't until we started episode 3 that we're like, oh no, he shouldn't have any powers, he's just cute.
It's funny how many of these last minute decisions could have completely changed the trajectory of this entire trilogy, but because they didn't, they were really able to lean into the whole cute anime princess angle, especially in this final episode where he basically just saves the day with his cuteness.
He flew down in a parachute and he what? Apparently, he stopped Microsoft from blockading the shipment of PS4s to the mall. Looks like he's all over the place winning the console wars for Sony.
While this is very funny, if I had to criticize anything about these 3 episodes, I'd say that the anime Kenny sequences could have maybe used a bit more action and actual examples of Kenny using his cuteness, you know, like out in the field. The parachute blockade thing is great, but I think that's kind of where it peaked. This is a small nitpick though, because in basically every other way, they absolutely nail the finale. They fully lean into every single thing that they set up to this point. My biggest laugh of the episode is definitely Cartman getting fed up with Bill Gates here.
Tell Bill Gates to suck my ass, Mom! Mom? Don't seriously tell Bill Gates to suck my ass. Tell him everything's cool and I'll comment a little bit.
And in Game of Thrones fashion, this final episode has it all. False alliances, betrayal, a Red Robin wedding. Though more in South Park fashion, they have a really raw and emotional confrontation between Stan and Kyle, where Kyle realizes that he trusted Cartman over his actual best friend.
But you couldn't just ask me. Because Xbox people don't care about the truth.
They just care about seamless multimedia connectivity.
And also in South Park fashion, some pretty explicit criticism of the Black Friday culture they've been parodying. When the mall finally opens, alongside all the animated violence, they intercut actual real-life footage of Black Friday stampedes.
News talks about like, okay, it's Black Friday today, you know, we have no reports of casualties, and you're just like, what is this, a fucking tornado or a war, or what are they talking about? And they're talking about shopping?
In the end, I think Stan had the right idea here. He tries to unite his friends, recognizing that the only people who profit from their feud are these corporations that they've pledged their allegiance to, and instead of fighting his friends, he gets the head of these corporations to duke it out. Honestly, the end of this episode contains a sequence that is easily one of my favorite in South Park history. After watching Bill Gates literally murder the competition in front of them, the children all somberly walk through the carnage of Black Friday as sad piano renditions of Christmas tunes play in the background, and then they buy their Xboxes. I can't think of a more perfect sequence that is not only emotionally impactful, but so beautifully illustrates the crossroads of all of these insane, disparate story elements that they've seamlessly woven together in this narrative. It's excellent stuff.
Black Friday is over. There's been death, violence, horrible human behavior, and the big winner here, decidedly, is Channel 9 News.
And I particularly love the message at the end. As all of the boys sit and play Xbox, it's clear that they aren't fulfilled. That winning the console wars and getting the best Black Friday deal wasn't worth the bloodshed that came with it.
You guys want to play outside or something?
And sure, this is ultimately also a slightly self-serving advertisement for their video game, but one of the things that South Park has always done best is showcase a kid's imagination at work. That's one of the reasons these episodes work so well, despite how off the rails they eventually flew. And so for the kids' ultimate lesson here, to be for them to embrace the imagination that got them there, I think is pretty great. Particularly because that's also what the Stick of Truth video game showcases so well in the same world through these same characters.
Like this. We can just play with this. Screw video games, dude. Who f***ing needs them? Yeah!
In the end, I think I myself may have even underappreciated this trilogy over the years. When you really look at it, it is a genuinely perfect intersection of everything South Park does well. Biting cultural and social commentary, fun pop cultural referencing and lambasting, all through the lens of a bunch of kids who just want to do kid stuff. South Park's most underrated trilogy for sure. South Park has spent a fair share of its existence diving into controversial topics, and despite the fact that they've done cultural commentary on countless controversies over the years, I rarely see people talk about the time they delved into those conspiracy theories. You know the ones. Maybe that's because it was surrounded by a ridiculous Hardy Boys parody, and was maybe a bit overshadowed by the countless ways Mr. Mackey found to describe somebody pooping in a urinal, but the real motivation behind the episode was to dunk on these kinds of conspiracists, which of course led Cartman on a path to answer one question.
What really happened on 9/11? What really happened on 9/11?
Mystery of the Urinal Deuce aired on October 11th, 2006 during South Park's 10th season. Honestly, season 10 is sort of an iconic season when it comes to Matt and Trey wading into controversial waters. Beginning the season killing Chef by doubling down on their Scientology bashing, continuing with the now banned Cartoon Wars episodes that attempted to show an image of Muhammad, and of course Man Bear Pig, which was wildly critical of Al Gore's climate change agenda. Honestly, across the board, season 10 really goes for it, and Mystery of the Urinal Deuce is no different. Obviously, the story begins with Mr. Mackey discovering that somebody pooped in the urinal, and Matt Stone explains in the commentary that this was something that actually happened at his elementary school.
And they brought all the boys into the gym, and they asked us who did it, and did all that thing where they tried to figure out who did it, and no one ever copped to it. And then that, of course, reminded us of 9/11 conspiracies, because they're much the same.
This is a pretty funny comment, but they actually reveal later in the commentary that the episode was initially only about 9/11 conspiracies, and they sort of tied in the Urinal Deuce storyline a bit later. The real inspiration was simply how dumbfounded they were that so many people were pushing 9/11 conspiracies.
This was our episode trying to deal with our astonishment about how people could be that dumb.
And so, as is often the case when a South Park character is taking a firm stance on something very harmful and foolish, Cartman was the one peddling these conspiracies.
Well, did you know that over 1/4 of people in America think that 9/11 was a conspiracy?
So initially, this really was just entirely about how stupid they believe 9/11 conspiracists are, and they had formed the entire episode around this premise alone. It wasn't until late into the production week that they found their missing piece.
But I remember it was Sunday that we came up with the idea of the urinal deuce. We're like, we gotta throw something else in here. And until then, it was actually just the Hardley boys trying to solve the mystery of the World Trade Center, which we thought was really funny. But
they initially just wanted to sort of use the story as a buffer so that the episode didn't come right out of the gate about 9/11 conspiracies, and also to inject a bit more comedy into something that was largely focused on angry and contentious subject matter.
So we added this scene with Mackie coming in, being all pissed off about the deuce in the urinal, and we thought it was how pissed off he was so funny that it was just one of those things that, you know, a lot of times we do on a Sunday. We just grabbed onto that, and it ended up being kind of more the fuel for the show.
And so they swapped out jet fuel for Mr. Mackey, who I think can melt steel beams, and I also think that comedically this was a really fun choice. This is definitely one of the quintessential Mr. Mackey episodes.
Okay, dropping your pants and then turning around, squatting over that urinal. Okay, maybe pulling your butt cheeks apart with your hands. Okay.
But there are two things acting as the sort of glue that ties these stories together. One, Cartman's obsessive conspiracy-fueled investigations, and two, the Hardley boys, investigating both the urinal deuce as well as those 9/11 conspiracies.
The Hardley boys in the case of the World Trade Center conspiracy.
The Hardley boys angle is the most purely comedic side of the story, primarily focusing on these caricatures of your classic teenage detectives who are quote-unquote following clues.
Oh, Frank, seriously? I have such a raging clue right now. I think we better follow it.
These segments, for the most part, just kind of play this joke over and over. It is purely caricature-based comedy with the raging clue double entendre. And while it is certainly uncomfortable and awkward, definitely makes me laugh. But the other side of the story, Cartman's own investigations, are definitely what hold the bulk of the commentary here. There are a couple angles. One, the poking fun at the absurdity of some of these 9/11 conspiracies, including some of the logical fallacies that can take place when entertaining these ideas.
Oh, really? Do you just believe everything you're told, Kyle?
The implication here being that the only reason Kyle doesn't believe these conspiracies are because he quote-unquote believes everything he is told, which is obviously a severe leap in logic. I'll touch more on specific conspiracies later, but this episode really focused on how these ideas spread. We see Butters start to entertain these conspiracies himself, not because of his own research, but simply because of Cartman's influence.
The government and the corporations headed by the Jews that carried out 9/11.
That's right, Butters.
God damn it! You see what happens when you spread this stupid crap, fat ass?
And they further explore the ways these ideas can spread through the results of Cartman's quote-unquote investigations here.
Which leads us all to the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. Kyle.
Interestingly, this episode was actually originally going to include a Dog the Bounty Hunter parody where Cartman has to track Kyle down to bring him to justice for perpetrating 9/11, but once they figured out the whole urinal deuce angle, they punted this entire idea to the following episode, Miss Teacher Bangs a Boy.
The idea of Cartman being Dog the Bounty Hunter was actually in the show before. It was actually in Mystery of the Urinal Deuce.
But obviously the assertion that Kyle is the person responsible for 9/11 is in fact completely absurd, and yet a lot of his classmates start to believe it just because of Cartman's presentation.
You gonna watch the game tonight, Butters? All right. I was not responsible for 9/11.
Rewatching Mystery of the Urinal Deuce actually made me realize that there have sort of been spiritual successors to this episode in more recent years. The different ways that conspiracies can be indoctrinated into people is explored pretty explicitly in the vaccination special, mostly focusing on QAnon, but the episode that really feels a lot like this one is season 26's Cupid Ye. That episode satirizes a lot of Kanye's Jews control the media rhetoric from when he was on that major media tour, and much like this one, the episode sort of focuses on Cartman spreading these ideas that Kyle is responsible for something that he isn't. In Cupid Ye, it's that he runs Hollywood, which leads to the kids trying to leverage Kyle's quote-unquote position for their own gain.
Because repeating a derogatory slur, even for the purpose of refuting it, can make stupid people think it's valid.
Holy shit, Kyle runs Hollywood.
This is largely the same idea being explored in Mystery of the Urinal Deuce. The idea that no matter how absurd or ridiculous, when people repeat these conspiracies, they spread, whether they're being repeated in a genuine manner or simply to refute and belittle fuel those ideas. And though Cupid Yee definitely makes a big point at the end of the episode to try and contextualize the inflammatory claims being made in a much more straightforward, fact-based manner, I do think that Kyle's sentiment in this episode largely represents the conclusion that Matt and Trey reached while making Mystery of the Urinal Deuce nearly 2 decades earlier.
All right, you know what? No matter what we say in the show, the people that think it's a conspiracy are still going to think it's a conspiracy, and so let's just make it about a turd in the urinal because it's just funnier.
It definitely feels like when making the episode, Matt and Trey set out to try and make a larger, unimpeachable point about 9/11 conspiracies, and sort of realized that at a certain point, people who are so deep into these conspiracy rabbit holes cannot really be reasoned with. They want to believe what they believe. And so they pivoted away from the Dog the Bounty Hunter stuff and really leaned into the conspiracy story, turning it into their own conspiracy. And to me, this is absolutely the genius of the episode. At first, taking the conspiracy all the way to the White House and revealing that Bush and the US government were in fact responsible for the 9/11 attacks.
All I had to do was have explosives planted in the base of the towers.
Then on 9/11, we pretended like 4 planes were being hijacked. Really, we just rerouted them to Pennsylvania, then flew 2 military jets in the World Trade Center filled with more explosives and shot down all the witnesses in Flight 93 with an F-15 after blowing up the Pentagon with a cruise missile.
This justifiably sees a very funny response from Kyle, who is just shocked that this could ever be true. And the reveal later is that, of course, it wasn't true. After the Hardley boys regroup with Stan and Kyle, they reveal what they've actually learned.
The 9/11 conspiracy is a government conspiracy.
This is genuinely such a fun and smart way to escalate this kind of a plot into a bigger and more creative story. When initially starting this episode, they simply wanted to dunk on 9/11 conspiracies, which they realized was decidedly less funny. But by examining conspiracy culture and taking their characters down that road in a new way, exploring the winding turns conspiracies can take if you let them, they found a much, much funnier outcome. That Bush and the US government want people to believe that 9/11 was an inside job because that is what makes them look as though they have the most power and control.
It's all right here in these secret documents, but you'll never get them.
Ironically, I think that these days, many people would have just openly believed this idea rather than recognizing the obvious satire, simply based on the number of comments I've gotten from people who genuinely, literally believe that South Park has been directly censored by the Biden administration. As someone who is not a fan of the Biden administration, I do think it's very funny that people flip between he is completely incompetent and cannot do anything and he has complete control over what is written into adult animated cartoons. A little bit of dissonance there. But I understand when people justifiably have less and less trust in their government, it leads to these kinds of conspiracies not just taking hold, but becoming increasingly mainstream. The episode ultimately brings everything together with the reveal that it was actually Stan who pooped in the urinal, and emphatically claims that obviously terrorists perpetrated 9/11. Honestly, it's pretty interesting how South Park has tackled conspiracy culture over the years. This was, of course, 2006, just 5 years after the September 11th attacks, and 9/11 was definitely a major early example of conspiracies taking hold and spreading wildly online. I personally remember watching many videos pushing these ideas even before YouTube, and at my younger age, finding them relatively compelling, and that has clearly permeated various parts of online subculture. In fact, in a study from just last year, YouGov found that about 20% of Americans believe that the US government was behind the 9/11 attacks. That is 1 in 5 Americans, with another 14% not being sure one way or another. So that is nearly 1/3 of all Americans with at least some skepticism in regards to what actually happened.
People? You mean sheeple?
Obviously, there are many degrees of 9/11 conspiracy culture, many different flavors of theories, some that feel somewhat reasonable and some that feel absolutely batshit absurd if you just put a little bit of logic behind them.
Those clues pointed out that all the 9/11 conspiracy theories could be disproven scientifically.
You've got your the US government knew beforehand and let it happen conspiracists, which is a bit simpler and tougher to disprove, but then you've got your there were no planes conspiracists, or explosives were planted in the tower, it was a controlled demolition, airliners couldn't take down a skyscraper people, who are decidedly and irrefutably wrong. I mean, seriously, you can disprove this simply with any amount of research into what is required to do a controlled demolition of any size, let alone to demolish 2 of the largest buildings in the world. Seriously, just go watch any video of a controlled demolition to understand what those explosions look and sound like. Or just looking into how the Twin Towers were constructed and why this kind of collision took them out so thoroughly, or how the specific circumstances circumstance of a commercial jetliner filled to the brim with jet fuel flying full speed into a building was a completely unprecedented event, and it was never even conceived of in regards to construction of the towers. Yes, the towers were built with the idea that maybe they could withstand a jetliner impacting them, but this was when they were designed in the late 1960s, and it was conceived as an unintentional lower speed collision. A plane losing its way in the fog like when the Empire State Building was hit. Not intentionally at near 700 miles per hour speeds. That concept was not even considered. Sorry for the rant, but some of these theories are just so frustrating, and as someone who has done a lot of research into those events very thoroughly, it really sucks how many people parrot some of the most easily refutable theories. And even 18 years ago, when the episode released, that was clearly what Matt and Trey were feeling as well. Just frustration that this idea was gaining any traction at all. But it's also clear that given these ideas have continued to be just as prevalent now nearly 20 years later, that they were sort of right in their initial conclusions, that people are just gonna believe this stuff if they want to. And no South Park episode or popular mechanics studies or YouTube videos are gonna deter people who really want to believe it.
Why people believe conspiracies is actually really interesting, but not as immediately funny. Yeah. So.
It's so obvious. How did we not see it before?
Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe. It's your boy BlastphamousHD. Twisms.